Chapter 708. Looks like we have competitors now, Yi Fan said half-jokingly as he added firewood to the fire. While I'm your competitor, you're also my competitor, and there are 3 of you. Kim Yaodong looked at the 3 of them and said with a smile, if we're talking about it, I'm the one who's at a disadvantage. Ha ha ha. Kamehameha laughed loudly when he heard that. Wizard Jin's 1,000-people technique is ever-changing and has reached the pinnacle of perfection. He can easily create thousands of people. If that's the case, the one who's at a disadvantage is not you, wizard, but the 3 of us. As Kamehameha said that, he looked up at Yi Fan. He was reminding Yi Fan. Kim Yaodong's famous technique was the 1,000-people technique that he had just mentioned. Once this technique was used, he could instantly create thousands of experts that looked exactly the same as his original body. What was even more unbelievable was that these 1,000 experts not only looked exactly the same, but their cultivation levels were also exactly the same as the original bodies. One could only imagine how strong their combat power was. This was also the reason why Kim Yaodong had come to Demon Island alone. There was no difference between him coming alone and 1,000 people coming together. Yi Fan understood tacitly and nodded slightly at Kamehameha. Kim Yaodong smiled and did not say anything. This time, the fire meteor fell from the sky. It doesn't belong to anyone. When the time comes, whoever has the ability to obtain it will naturally get it. It's fair and reasonable, Yi Fan said with a smile. Mr. Yi is right. Kim Yaodong put down the coconut in his hand and looked at Yi Fan. This fire meteor belongs to whoever has the ability to obtain it. It's fair and reasonable. I can promise Wizard that as long as the fire meteor falls into Wizard's hands first, I, Yi Fan, will definitely not try to snatch it. Yi Fan went straight to the point and said, however, if that flame meteor falls into my hands first, then I won't be polite if someone tries to snatch it away. Yi Fan didn't care how respected this person surnamed Jean was or how powerful he was. He had to clearly explain the most basic rules and bottom line to this person in advance. This time, he was determined to obtain this flame meteor. Mr. Yi is indeed a straightforward person. I admire you, Kim Yaodong said to Yi Fan in a clear voice. Mr. Yi, don't worry. As long as flame meteor falls into Mr. Ye's hands, I definitely won't lay a finger on it. Are you serious, mage? Yi Fan stared at Kim Yaodong and asked with narrowed eyes. I, Kim Yaodong, am a man of my word. I never go back on my words, Kim Yaodong said. Okay, I believe in Wizard. Yi Fan picked up the coconut milk and said, I, Yi Fan, will replace wine with water. Here's a toast to Wizard. Kim Yaodong also picked up the coconut milk and raised his hand. After the 2 of them greeted each other, they drank it in one gulp. This gentleman's agreement stopped the 2 of them from opposing each other. Bamu Chongqing's expression was serious. Kamehameha's face was expressionless. The 2 of them seemed to have absolute confidence that they would be the first to obtain the flame meteor. However, it was still unknown who would win. After eating, the 4 of them fell asleep quietly around the fire. None of them were in the mood to chat. The appearance of a strong competitor made both sides very cautious. Kim Yaodong lay down in his clothes with a serious expression. His competitor this time was Eldritch's reincarnation. He was definitely not a normal expert. Whether or not he could bring the flame meteor back to Korea would depend on his performance in 3 days. Yi Fan had his back to Kim Yaodong. His eyes were staring straight ahead as he fell into deep thought. He couldn't detect the other's cultivation and aura at all. He also couldn't figure out the characteristics of the other's moves and special abilities. He didn't have absolute confidence that he would be able to obtain the flame meteor before the other in 3 days. The only thing he could do was to conserve his energy. The moment the flame meteor appeared, he would gather all of his cultivation and be the first to obtain the flame meteor. Bamu Chongqing was lying on his side. His eyes were wide open and his face was filled with thoughts. The gentleman's agreement between Yi Fan and Kim Yaodong made him and Kamehameha unable to interfere. In other words, if Yi Fan won, all three of them would win. If Yi Fan lost, all three of them would lose. Although Yi Fan was powerful, Kim Yaodong wasn't someone to be trifled with either. Even Yi Fan couldn't detect this person's aura. This person's cultivation was very high. Kamehameha, who was lying across from Bamu Chongqing, frowned slightly. His gaze was deep. This time, he, who was always confident, didn't know what to do. He didn't know which of the two of them would obtain the flame meteor first in 3 days. The warm cave was extremely quiet. Only the sound of wind and thunder could be heard outside, as well as the crackling of wood in the fire in the blink of an eye. It was the morning of the next day. At this time, the rain outside the cave had stopped and the wind had dispersed. A few rays of sunlight shone in from the entrance of the cave. It's finally stopped. The gray-robed Kamehameha stood at the entrance of the cave and reached out to block the sunlight. He smiled and said, "If it didn't stop, this old man's body would grow moldy." As he spoke, he walked out of the cave. Yi Fan and Bamu Chongqing followed closely behind him and walked out of the cave. They had been cooped up in the cave for a day and a night. They were even more cooped up than Kamehameha. Kim Yaodong was lying quietly next to the fire, still resting with his eyes closed. He had come ashore in the middle of the night last night, so of course he didn't feel cooped up. At this time, the surface of the South Sea was calm and sparkling. The moist sea breeze blew in their faces, making them feel relaxed and happy. All of their frustrations were swept away in an instant. Yaoshi, Yaoshi. Kamehameha breathed in the fresh air after the rain. He stretched his legs and shouted excitedly. "Brother Bufan, how confident are you that you can win against Kim Yaodong?" Bamu Chongqing asked Yi Fan as they walked toward the sea. "I don't know how confident I am, but I will do my best," Yi Fan replied to Bamu Chongqing. "That's good." Yagi Zhongqing stopped and turned around to look at Yi Fan. "From now on, you only need to focus on absorbing spiritual power and increasing your cultivation. You don't need to worry about anything else. Whether we win or lose in 3 days' time, it all depends on you." This. Yi Fan frowned after listening. Mr. Yagi is right. Kamehameha came over from not far away and said to Yi Fan, "This task is jointly carried out by the three of us. You and Kim Yaodong are competing, so the two of us can't help. Now your task is to increase your cultivation as much as possible within 3 days. Leave the rest to me and Mr. Yagi." "But what if there are other masters on the island in 3 days?" Yi Fan said. "Don't worry, Mr. Kamehameha and I can handle it." Bamu Chongqing patted Yi Fan on the shoulder and said, "Your responsibility is greater than ours. We should do this. This is the best way the two of us can help you now." Kamehameha looked into Yi Fan's eyes and said solemnly, "This okay?" Yi Fan replied, "Ha ha, that's right." Kamehameha laughed. Bamu Chongqing patted Yi Fan on the shoulder with a smile. Whoosh! Just as the three of them reached an agreement, a whistling sound came from afar into Yi Fan's ears. Yi Fan frowned and immediately looked up at the sky. Who would have thought that when he looked up, Yi Fan was so shocked that he was speechless for a long time. Above the clouds hundreds of miles away, a man and a woman in black robes were shuttling through the clouds and flying toward them at high speed. The man had a tall nose and golden eyes. He was tall and sturdy, and there was a 3-foot-long black stick-like object hanging from his waist. The woman had fair skin, blue eyes, and a curvaceous body. On her shoulder was a black cat without any other fur. The two of them wore gorgeous black robes and tall black pointed hats. Although they were both wearing pointed hats, the two of them were completely different from the one Kim Yaodong was wearing. Kim Yaodong's pointed hat was flat and tall, while the two of them wore round, curved hats that were slightly tilted backwards. What surprised Yi Fan even more was what the two of them were riding. The two of them weren't riding a red-crowned crane or a luan bird, but 2 brooms. Yi Fan had heard of people flying on swords and riding on the wind, but he had never seen anyone flying on brooms. Whoosh, the two of them flew at an extremely fast speed, and their black robes stuck to their bodies and fluttered in the wind. While Yi Fan was in a daze, the two of them had already broken through the clouds. European dark warlocks! Kamehameha, who was on the ground, immediately frowned and exclaimed when he saw the two of them rushing out of the clouds. I didn't expect them to come too. Bamu Chongqing exclaimed. European dark warlocks? Yi Fan frowned and muttered to himself. This was the first time he had heard of this name. The world was so big, and there were so many strange things. He didn't expect such strange people to exist in this world. As Yi Fan thought about it, he used his senses to sense the two of them flying at high speed in the sky. The two of them had a very strange aura, and it was very mixed, as if it was all-encompassing. Before this, Yi Fan had never sensed such an aura. These dark warlocks are good at witchcraft and black magic, and they are extremely difficult to deal with. We must be careful. Remember, Kamehameha turned his head and said to Yi Fan and Bamu Chongqing, don't touch anything that they have touched, and avoid the food that they have touched. Unless it is absolutely necessary, don't fight with them. If you have to fight, you must kill them in one blow and destroy their bodies. Otherwise, you won't be able to kill them. Are they that powerful? Bamu Chongqing frowned and asked after hearing Kamehameha's words. These dark warlocks are proficient in the power of nature and can spread all kinds of plagues. I heard that many countries in Europe were destroyed by these dark warlocks, and the number of people who died from plagues was as high as 1 million, Kamehameha said with a serious face. After Yi Fan and Bamu Chongqing heard the news, they secretly frowned. Phew, just as the three of them were talking, the two dark warlocks riding brooms had already flown to the sky above Demon Island. They are here. Use your spirit energy to protect your mouth and nose to prevent being poisoned. Kamehameha reminded the two of them in a low voice. The two of them nodded slightly, and each of them urged their spirit energy to set up an invisible air shield around them. Whoosh! Chapter 709. Excuse me, is this Demon Island? After landing, the burly male sorcerer with golden eyes asked the three of them in broken Chinese. This place was the closest to the Great Ming Dynasty, so they thought the three of them were from the Great Ming Dynasty. Yes, this is Demon Island, Bamu Chongqing replied to the male sorcerer. Thank you. The male sorcerer thanked Bamu Chongqing, then looked at the blonde sorceress, and said a few words in English. The female sorceress looked up and glanced at the three of them before her gaze finally stopped on Yi Fan. She used her pair of blue eyes to size up Yi Fan. She was slightly surprised. Yi Fan stared at the female sorceress with a calm expression. After sizing up Yi Fan, the female sorceress turned her head and said a few words to the male sorcerer. The male sorcerer frowned. Are the three of you also looking for the comet? The male sorcerer frowned and asked the three of them. Yes, Bamu Chongqing replied. I advise you to leave this place as soon as possible, the male sorcerer said coldly to the three of them. You can't take the comet away. Don't lose your lives. Thank you for your concern. We'll definitely take the comet, Bamu Chongqing said with a smile. You'll regret it. As the male sorcerer spoke, he rode his broom and slowly floated off the ground. Then, he soared into the air and flew toward the other side of Demon Island at an extremely fast speed. The female sorceress looked at Yi Fan with her blue eyes and revealed a charming smile. Then, she also soared into the air and chased after the male sorcerer. This is going to be interesting. Even the European dark sorcerers are involved, Bamu Chongqing said as he looked at the two sorcerers who rose from the ground. It's good that it's lively, Kamehameha said with a smile. We can only fish in troubled waters. The more forces there are, the more advantageous it is for us. We have more and more neighbors now, and all of them are hostile, Bamu Chongqing said with a smile. You have to get used to it, Kamehameha laughed. It's only been 2 days. In 3 days, this island should be as lively as the new year, Bamu Chongqing said with a smile. From now on, we have to be extra careful, said Kamehameha. Didn't you hear the warning of the wizard? He told us to leave this place as soon as possible, or we'll lose our lives. From tonight onwards, you and I will take turns keeping watch to prevent anyone from causing trouble, Bamu Chongqing said to Kamehameha. Kamehameha nodded when the 3 of them returned to the cave. The bonfire was still warm, but Kim Yaodong was nowhere to be seen. None of the 3 knew where he had gone. If I'm not wrong, Kim Yaodong has found another place, Kamehameha said to the 2 of them. That's for the best, Bamu Chongqing said. Everyone has their own master, and everyone has to fight for themselves. It's better for everyone to live separately. The situation is getting more and more complicated. We have to be extra vigilant, Kamehameha said as he sat down by the bonfire and reignited the dying fire. I think we can make a battle plan now. Yi Fan looked at the 2 of them and said. Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing looked at each other, then turned to look at Yi Fan. Brother Bufan, you mean? Bamu Chongqing asked Yi Fan. Now that the strong enemy has appeared, there will be a fierce battle in 3 days, Yi Fan said to the 2 of them. Kim Yaodong and I have a gentleman's agreement. Regardless of whether he can get the fire meteor or not, he will not be our enemy. What we have to deal with now is the 2 European black wizards who have just appeared, and the other is Hai Zhonka, who has yet to show his true face. Hai Zhonka? The guy who attacked us at night with the art of sprite manipulation? Bamu Chongqing asked. Didn't you say that he had already left? The place where the fire meteor fell is in the southern sea. Once the fire meteor fell into the sea, the person in the most advantageous situation would be him, Yi Fan said. He could completely use the water manipulation technique and the spirit manipulation technique to directly transport the meteor from the bottom of the sea without anyone knowing. This is indeed a difficult problem. When Kamehameha heard Yi Fan's words, he immediately frowned and said, The fire meteor fell in the South China Sea. If it really fell into the sea, it would be difficult to deal with. Unless we can stop the fire meteor from falling into the sea. Yi Fan proposed a bold idea. Stop the fire meteor from falling into the sea? How is that possible? When Bamu Chongqing heard Yi Fan's words, he suddenly felt incredulous. The fire meteor weighed tens of thousands of kilograms, and it fell from the sky. Its strength and momentum could even raise a medium-sized city to the ground in an instant. Yi Fan actually wanted to stop the fire meteor from falling into the sea. This was simply a joke. The wooden turtle and the crane were also dumbfounded after hearing this. Stopping the fire meteor in the air was easy to say, but it was easier said than done. I have already thought about it. The moment the fire meteor appears, I will freeze it. Then, I will use my spiritual energy to stop it from falling into the sea. This way, I can guarantee that I will get the fire meteor immediately and beat Kim Yaodong. At the same time, I can guarantee that the sea traveler won't be able to do anything, Yi Fan said to the 2 of them. But what if? Bamu Chongqing frowned and asked Yi Fan, what if you can't stop the fire meteor from falling into the sea? There is no what if. I must stop the fire meteor from falling into the sea, Yi Fan said solemnly. But to do this well, I need the help of the 2 of you. What help? Tell us, Kamehameha asked. When I stop the fire meteor from falling into the sea, I will use all my strength. At that time, I won't be able to divert my attention to fight with others, Yi Fan said to the 2 of them. So, at that time, I need the 2 of you to protect me. Don't let anyone disturb me. Okay, we will protect you, Bamu Chongqing said to Yi Fan. Don't worry, we won't let anyone disturb you. There's one more thing that I need to tell you. Yi Fan looked at the 2 of them and continued, If I'm not mistaken, the place where the meteor fell was none other than Demon Island. On this fiend island? Are you saying that? Yagi Zhangqing's eyes widened in shock. That's right. 3 days later, the fire meteor will fall from the sky directly on Demon Island, Yi Fan said calmly. Why are you so sure? Kamehameha asked Yi Fan with a frown. This fire meteor is part of the jinx. It has a strong murderous aura, Yi Fan explained. Demon Island, which has absorbed the murderous aura for hundreds of years, is the same. The two of them attract each other, which is why the fire meteor will fall on Demon Island. This is also the reason why these experts have gathered at Fiend Island. I see. Why didn't I think of this? Kamehameha suddenly realized. With the feng shui layout of the Yimo Sea suppressing Yimo and the infiltration of the heavenly spirit's murderous aura, the Yimo on the island can leave the island in advance and become free. No wonder these experts didn't go to the nearby islands and insisted on fighting with us for Demon Island, Bamu Chongqing said. So, it is imperative to stop the fire meteor from falling, Yi Fan said. Bamu Chongqing and Kamehameha nodded solemnly. Just as the three of them reached an agreement, the melodious sound of a flute came from the sky outside the cave. The sound of the flute was melodious and pleasant to the ears, but the tone was full of exotic charm. Looks like a new neighbor has arrived, Bamu Chongqing said. Let's go out and take a look, Kamehameha said and stepped out of the cave. Bamu Chongqing and Yi Fan followed closely behind. When they arrived outside the cave, the three of them stood side by side and looked up at the sky. Below the clouds, a huge blanket was fluttering in the air, flying nimbly. The carpet was huge, 9 feet square, and the pattern was extremely exquisite and beautiful. On the flying carpet, a man dressed in strange white clothes sat steadily on it. The man's face was thin and his skin was bronze. His head was wrapped in a white headscarf, and there was a gorgeous scimitar inlaid with all kinds of gems on his waist. His eyes were flickering with a strange light. In his hand was a white flute, and the melodious sound of the flute just now had come from this flute. Persian divine hand? Kamehameha frowned and muttered to himself. Even the Persian has come? Bamu Chongqing said. The elites of various countries have gathered. This is going to be fun, Kamehameha said. Yi Fan's expression was calm and unperturbed. He had already seen people riding brooms, so he wasn't surprised to see people riding on flying carpets. Whoosh! After arriving above Demon Island, the flute sound of the Persian started to calm down, and the flying carpet he was sitting on started to descend slowly. When the flying carpet landed, the Persian looked at the giant crab iceberg that was more than 1,000 feet tall and frowned slightly. Obviously, he was shocked by this iceberg. Whoosh! When it was less than 5 feet away from the ground, the flying carpet automatically hovered. The Persian sitting on it put the flute in his hand into his arms and slowly got off the flying carpet. Snap! The Persian man stretched out his hand and snapped his fingers in the air. Whoosh! When the huge flying carpet heard the snap of fingers, it immediately folded and rolled up automatically as if it had a mind of its own, turning into a 4 feet long cloth stick and automatically tied to the Persian man's back. Whoosh! After putting away the flying carpet, the Persian man in a white robe put his hands behind his back and lightly tapped the ground with the tip of his foot. His figure instantly soared into the air and quickly flew toward the cave where the three of them were. His speed was as fast as an arrow leaving the bow. The three of them looked calm and stood there motionlessly. The Persian man's action of putting his hands behind his back meant that he didn't have any hostility. Whoosh! The Persian man's movement technique was extremely fast. He quickly arrived in front of the three of them and instantly stopped. I am Atal Suddi. The bronze-skinned Persian man with a long beard greeted the three of them in very stiff Chinese. What did he say? Bamu Chongqing asked Kamehameha in Japanese. He said his name is Atal Suddi, Kamehameha replied. Bamu Chongqing. Kamehameha. Night Bufan. Chapter 710. You guys are here for the stars in the sky? The Persian man asked the three of them in short and stiff Chinese. Yes. Bamu Chongqing directly replied. After hearing this, the Persian man nodded slowly. Mister, did you also come here for the meteor? Kamehameha asked the Persian man. Those who came to Demon Island at this time were all here for the flame meteor. However, to their surprise, the Persian man shook his head with a smile. This person actually didn't come for the flame meteor. The three of them were greatly surprised. Mister, if you didn't come for the flame meteor, then why did you come to Demon Island? Kamehameha asked the Persian man. Monkey. The Persian man smiled and said, I came to this island to catch monkeys, not for the stars in the sky. Monkey? The three of them became more and more confused. This island is the monkey. The Persian man continued. This island is the monkey? What do you mean? Bamu Chongqing frowned and looked at Kamehameha. Kamehameha stroked his long beard with a puzzled expression. He didn't understand the meaning of the Persian man's words. If I didn't guess wrong, in 3 days, he will take away the demons on Demon Island. Yi Fan looked at the Persian man in strange clothes and said, Yes, yes. The Persian man expressed his agreement with Yi Fan's explanation and said, You are called demons, we are called monkeys, devil monkeys. So that's how it is. Kamehameha suddenly understood. The world was so big that nothing was too strange. He didn't expect that there would be people interested in the demons on Demon Island. There are many powerful people on this island. I don't know if they are all here for the stars. The Persian man looked around Demon Island and said. He had already sensed many strange auras on Demon Island, and each of them was an expert. There are many guests on this island, and they all came for the stars. Yi Fan smiled and said, Mister, you are the only one who came for the monkeys. God bless me. It seems my luck is very good. The Persian man smiled. If you're not my opponent, you're my friend. Kamehameha smiled at the Persian man and said, Mr. Suddy, if you don't mind, please rest in the cave and eat something. As he spoke, he extended his hand to invite the Persian man into the cave. Looking at the current situation, one more friend was one more source of strength. It was rare that this Persian expert did not come for the flame meteor, so they naturally wanted to pull him into their camp. Thank you, thank you. The Persian man smiled and walked into the cave. The four of them sat down beside the fire. Mr. Suddy, you're from Persia, right? Kamehameha took a coconut and handed it to the Persian man. Yes. The Persian man took the coconut and said, I am indeed from Persia. Mister, you came all the way here for the demon on Demon Island? Bamu Chongqing asked the Persian man. Yes. The Persian man drank a few mouthfuls of coconut milk, then wiped his mouth with his sleeve and said, 15 years ago, I went to the great Ming dynasty to do some business. When I passed by this island, I found the monkeys on this island. Oh, they are the demons you speak of. I calculated that the devil monkey would obtain the power of the stars in 15 years and leave this island. Therefore, 15 years later, I came here today to subdue them and bring them back to my country. The Persian man's words made the expressions of the three people present change greatly. This Persian expert was indeed powerful. He could actually calculate that the flame meteor would fall on this island 15 years ago. Mr. Skill is very high. This old man admires it very much. Kamehameha said to the Persian man, What does Mr. know about the flame meteor? Since this Persian man's skill was very high, why not ask him about the specific time, angle, and location of the flame meteor from him? I advise you not to touch that star. The Persian man put down the coconut and said to the three people, That star is an inauspicious object, so it is best to avoid it. If you insist on taking it, it will do you no good. Mister, you may not know, but this object is very important to the three of us. Please enlighten us. Kamehameha could tell from this person's words that he knew the flame meteor like the back of his hand. What do you want to do with this inauspicious object? The Persian man looked up at the three people and asked. This. Kamehameha didn't know how to answer for a moment. To forge a saber. Yi Fan, who had been silent since entering the cave, replied, "We plan to use this object to forge a saber." "Forge a saber?" The Persian man frowned and asked. "Yes," Yi Fan replied. "I see that the three of you are experts in wielding sabers and swords. Don't you know that if you use this object to forge a saber or sword, it will be an evil saber?" The Persian man asked the three people. After hearing this, the three people looked at each other. It was obvious that this Persian man was also an expert in forging weapons. "To tell you the truth, mister, we are also under orders. We have no choice," Bamu Chongqing said to the Persian man. "The meteoric iron in this flame meteor is only one of the materials used to forge a saber. It is not the entire material. So, mister, please enlighten us." After hearing this, the Persian man lowered his head and remained silent. He seemed to be thinking. The three people waited quietly and didn't speak. After a long time, the Persian man said, 3 days later, at noon, southeast. After hearing this, the three people were overjoyed. "Thank you, Mr. Suddy." Kamehameha thanked the Persian man. "Thank you for your guidance, mister." Yi Fan also thanked the Persian man. With the accurate time and direction of the fall, it could be said that he had already won half of the competition between him and Kim Yaodong. The poisonous crab ice mountain by the sea must be made by this mister, right? The Persian man asked Yi Fan. Yi Fan was stunned when he heard that. Yi Fan took a large piece of fragrant rabbit meat and handed it to the Persian man, asking, "How did Mr. Suddy guess that it was me? Not only is this Mr.'s spiritual chi pure and deep, but his body also faintly exudes ice and fire chi." The Persian man took the rabbit meat and said, "If I'm not wrong, Mr. either has the unique skill of ice and fire, or carries a secret treasure of ice and fire, or both. That's why you can release such a biting cold chi and condense such a huge ice mountain." After hearing this, Yi Fan smiled. In his heart, he was very surprised by this person's cultivation. With just a casual glance, he could tell that his spiritual chi was ice and fire chi. Not only was this person's special technique extraordinary, but his cultivation was also unfathomable. Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing were also very surprised after hearing this. "Am I right?" The Persian man looked at Yi Fan and asked. "Mr. Suddy's eyes are really sharp," Yi Fan said with a smile. "Yes, that ice mountain was indeed condensed by my cold chi." The Persian man smiled and nodded. He seemed to be very satisfied with the result of his deduction. Rustle, just as the four of them were talking, a faint rustling sound suddenly came from outside the cave. The sound came closer and closer, becoming more and more frequent. Kamehameha, who was drinking coconut milk, suddenly frowned. He put down the coconut, quickly got up, and went to the entrance of the cave to look outside. When Yi Fan and Bamu Chongqing heard this sound, they immediately stood up and went to Kamehameha's side. The scene in front of them made their scalps tingle. Tens of thousands of poisonous snakes snaked out from all directions of Demon Island and crazily crawled toward the entrance of the cave. Hiss! Hiss! The snakes raised their triangular heads, twisted their colorful bodies, and spat out their forked tongues as they swarmed over. "It's the Thousand Snake Formation," Kamehameha said with a frown. "It was done by the European wizards. It seems that they won't stop until they drive us away," Bamu Chongqing said as he looked at the poisonous snakes all over the mountain. "I'll seal these poisonous creatures with cold chi," Yi Fan said as he prepared to leave the cave. Bamu Chongqing grabbed Yi Fan. "Have you forgotten your mission?" Bamu Chongqing asked Yi Fan. "Leave this kind of small matter to me and Mr. Kamehameha. I'll go burn them and make snake soup for you later," Kamehameha said as he prepared to leave the cave. He was proficient in the 5 elements spell, so he was naturally proficient in the fire spell. A mere 1,000 snake formation was not a problem for him. However, just as he was about to leave the cave, the Persian man who had been sitting by the fire moved. He slowly took out the pure white flute from his bosom, placed it by his mouth, and gently blew into it. The melodious and pleasing sound of the flute drifted out of the cave in an instant. Kamehameha stopped in his tracks. He knew that the Persian man had made his move. Sha sha sha, as the crisp sound of the flute continued to spread, the snakes all over the mountain immediately stopped moving. They raised their colorful bodies high and stood there quietly as if they were listening to the beautiful sound of the flute. Sha, after a long time, the snakes lowered their bodies and turned back to where they came from. They quickly retreated like a colorful tide and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. What a powerful spirit exorcism spell! When Yi Fan saw this, he was secretly shocked. This person was proficient in the spirit telepathy spell, and his cultivation was similar to Jinshan from Pear Blossom Palace. Jinshan was also proficient in flute music and could communicate with birds and beasts. "Thank you, Mr. Sadi, for your help," Kamehameha turned around and said to the Persian man with a smile. The spellcaster cast the spell from the other side of the island and did not attack you ruthlessly. "He only wanted to drive you away from here," the Persian man said. "These spotted snakes were only confused by them and did not intend to attack you. Therefore, there is no need for you to kill them." As the Persian man spoke, he put the flute back into his chest. Seeing that the snakes had retreated, Yi Fan sat by the fire again. Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing cautiously looked outside the cave. After confirming that there were no abnormalities, they returned to the cave. "I hope that Mr. Yi can let those killer crabs live," the Persian man looked at Yi Fan and said. "They are the same as those poisonous snakes. They were controlled by someone and did not intend to. Mr. Sadi is merciful. I will do as you say." Yi Fan agreed to the Persian man's request. Yi Fan had always respected kind-hearted people. The Persian man was soft-hearted, so Yi Fan referred to himself as a junior to show his respect. "Thank you, Mr. Yi," the Persian man said with a smile. Chapter 711. 3 days quickly passed. In the blink of an eye, it was night time. In these 3 days, several groups of people came to Demon Island one after another. Among these people, there were Caucasians who came in leather hot air balloons, British people who came in huge ships, and even shaman sorcerers who rode giant eagles, their faces painted with all sorts of strange patterns, and their hair full of little braids. However, these people all left dejectedly after staying on the island for less than 2 hours. The royal wizard Kim Yaodong and the pair of dark sorcerers from Europe showed them what it meant by "there was always someone better than you." As soon as the Caucasians' leather hot air balloons landed on the island, a large number of crows appeared in the sky. They stood densely on the hot air balloons, and it was extremely horrifying. When the Caucasians saw this, they knew that things were not good and immediately drove the hot air balloons back the way they came. Before the Englishmen on the huge ship could dock, a large amount of seaweed mysteriously appeared in the sea around the ship. As if possessed by demons, the seaweed crazily climbed up the ship and tightly wrapped around the entire ship. It even automatically tied up a few crew members and hung them on the mast. When the panicked Englishmen saw this, they immediately shouted in the name of God and quickly turned the ship around, leaving Demon Island as quickly as possible. As for the shaman sorcerer who came riding the giant eagle, he was in an even more sorry state. As soon as he landed on the island, his head full of small braids suddenly flew up for no reason, scaring the shaman sorcerer into screaming and jumping into the sea to extinguish the fire. After extinguishing the raging fire on his head, the shaman sorcerer jumped on the eagle and flew away from Demon Island without looking back. Seeing the sorry state of these people, Yi Fan was happy for them from the bottom of his heart. They were lucky that they did not stay on Demon Island. If they had really stayed on the island with their abilities, they would not have been able to survive for more than a day. Currently, there were only 4 powers on the Demon Island: Jin Yaodong, the chief of the Korean Royal Mage Legion, a male and a female dark warlock from Europe, a tall Sudi, the Persian Divine Hand, and the 3 of them from the East Sea. Among the four factions, Atal Sadi was excluded. He was here to catch the monkey, not to get the flaming meteor. Tomorrow is the day of the fire meteor. We have to be extra careful tonight to prevent the dark magi from attacking us. Inside the cave, Bamu Chongqing used a white handkerchief to wipe the shiny blade in his hand as he calmly said, "I'll keep watch tonight. You guys just need to rest," Kamehameha, who was sitting in front of the fire, said calmly as he drank his fish soup. "I'll keep watch with you," Bamu Chongqing said to Kamehameha. "There may be a fierce battle tomorrow. You'd better save your strength," Kamehameha said to Bamu Chongqing. "I'm old, and I don't have much sleep. Leave the night watch to me." "Then I'll have to trouble you, Senior," Bamu Chongqing said. In terms of battle prowess, he was not inferior to Kamehameha. But in terms of divergent ability, he was far inferior to Kamehameha. Kim Yaodong and the Dark Magi from Europe were all experts in divergent ability. To deal with these divergent ability experts, Kamehameha was more suitable because Kamehameha himself was also a divergent ability expert. Kamehameha smiled faintly and continued to drink his fish soup. Yi Fan didn't say anything after hearing this. The three of them had already agreed that his mission was the fire meteor. He didn't need to intervene in other matters. In these 3 days, he started to restrain his spirit qi for the first time. He condensed all his spirit qi into his sea of qi and began to absorb as much spirit qi as possible from the outside world into his body through the breathing technique. At this time, he looked no different from an ordinary person. All of this was seen through by Atal Sadi, but he didn't expose it. Among the three of them, the young man surnamed Yi had the highest cultivation. If he guessed correctly, at noon tomorrow, this young man would be the main character. After Mr. Yi obtains this meteorite, it's best to seal it with the ice seal technique. Don't let it be contaminated by the yin qi of that ominous object. The Persian man looked at Yi Fan, who was silent beside the fire, and said, "Remember, remember." After hearing this, Yi Fan raised his gaze and looked at the Persian man. "Oh? Why do you say that, Mr. Sudi?" Yi Fan asked the Persian man. Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing were also attracted by the Persian man's topic and turned to look at him. "Pardon my bluntness, but this inauspicious item can be touched by anyone but you, Mr. Yi," the Persian man said to Yi Fan. "After obtaining this item, it's best for these two to take it away, in order to avoid new problems." "I don't understand what you're saying, Mr. Sudi," Yi Fan said to the Persian man. Although Mr. Ye's spiritual cultivation is pure and domineering, the auras in his body are chaotic. The Persian man stared into Yi Fan's eyes and said slowly, "These auras are both good and evil, hard and soft. To be honest, it's very difficult for Mr. Yi to maintain a balance between them. If it were a normal person, their mind would have been in chaos and they would have gone crazy." After hearing this, Yi Fan frowned. This Atal Sudi really had sharp eyes. He saw through the distribution of the spiritual qi in his body at a glance and pointed out the situation he was in now. "I advise Mr. Yi to deal with this matter as soon as possible. Don't wait until everything is in vain before you make plans," the Persian man said calmly to Yi Fan. "In your opinion, what should I do?" Yi Fan frowned and asked the Persian man. The Persian man shook his head. "I've seen people with rich spiritual qi, but I've never seen spiritual qi as pure and domineering as Mr. Ye's," the Persian man said. "I'm ashamed of my inferiority and can't do anything about your situation." After hearing this, Yi Fan didn't say a word. He thought that the Persian man could give him a few pointers, but he didn't expect him to be powerless. Bamu Chongqing and Kamehameha looked at each other and didn't say anything. They only knew that Yi Fan's cultivation was heaven-defying, but they never thought that Yi Fan would be in such a difficult situation. "No matter what, I still have to thank you, Mr. Sudi," Yi Fan said to the Persian man with a faint smile. "Mr. Yi, you're welcome," the Persian man said to Yi Fan. If there's a chance, you can go to Persia. My brother may be able to help you solve this problem, but it also depends on your luck. My brother has a strange temper and is temperamental. He often travels around the world, so it's still unknown if you'll have the chance to meet him. Why would Mr. Suddy help me? Yi Fan frowned and asked after hearing the Persian man's words. He didn't expect the Persian man to help him like this. Mr. Yi can restrain the evil energy in his body and keep his mind clear. He must be a gentleman. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to reach such a state, the Persian man said. The Yin Fang tattoo has appeared in the corner of your eyes. You must have done a great deed. I can help you, Mr. Yi. It's according to heaven. Mr. Suddy, I can't thank you enough. Yi Fan nodded to the Persian man. The Persian man smiled and waved his hand. Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing sighed with emotion when they saw this. It was no wonder that Yi Fan had so many adventures. It was all thanks to his kind heart. As the saying goes, those who know me will know my worries. Those who don't know me will know what I want. In other people's eyes, Yi Fan had everything he should have and everything he shouldn't have. Money, status, cultivation base, female confidants, divine weapons, supreme secret techniques. Who else in the world could compare to him? However, those who truly understood Yi Fan knew that he was suffering more than anyone else. He was in his 20s, but his hair was already silver. He had just gotten married, but he had lost his beloved wife. His cultivation was heaven-defying, but he had troubles all over his body. He was in danger of going crazy at any time. He was the luckiest man in the world, but he was also the most miserable man in the world. Luck and misfortune were concentrated on this young man at the same time. It's getting late. Everyone should rest. Kamehameha stood up from the fire. He held the treasured sword Jade Breaker in his hand and said, I'm going to guard the cave entrance. As he spoke, he walked toward the cave entrance. Go to sleep. Everyone will be busy tomorrow. Bamu Chongqing patted Yi Fan's shoulder and said. Yi Fan nodded and lay down on his side. Bamu Chongqing hugged his sword and leaned against the stone wall. He closed his eyes and slept. The Persian man spread out his exquisite flying carpet. He then used his hands as a pillow and closed his eyes to sleep. Of the three people, one had to obtain the meteorite, one had to protect it, and one had to capture the Yin demons on Demon Island. They all had their own matters to attend to. Kamehameha started a fire at the cave entrance. He then stabbed the treasured sword Jade Breaker into the ground and sat cross-legged. He closed his eyes and focused. This was his last night on Demon Island. He had to guard this cave entrance. Whoosh whoosh, the island was quiet. Only the sound of the waves could be heard. During the first half of the night, everything was peaceful. However, during the second half of the night, subtle changes began to occur on the island. Fog began to appear on the island. The fog drifted from the sea to Demon Island. It was neither fast nor slow. Soon, the dense fog instantly covered the starlight in the sky. Kamehameha slowly opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. Humph! Kamehameha's mouth curved and he let out a cold laugh. He gently picked up a piece of red charcoal from the fire in front of him. Then, he clasped his thumb and middle finger and gently flicked it at the fog in the air. Whoosh! The red charcoal quickly shot out from Kamehameha's hand. It drew a beautiful line of fire and rushed toward the thick fog in the air. Bang! The moment it touched the fog, the fingernail-sized charcoal instantly turned into a fireball and quickly exploded. The speed at which the fireball exploded was extremely fast. Its momentum was also extremely shocking. In an instant, it formed a huge ring of flames. The thick fog that filled the sky was quickly pushed back by the ring of flames. Sizzling sounds could be heard. The raging flames illuminated Kamehameha's face. He poked at the fire in front of him and looked up at the sky. His face was filled with contempt. Whoosh! After the thick fog that filled the sky retreated for more than 10 zhang, it suddenly became angry. They instantly merged together and twisted into a thick pillar of fog. Then, like a huge dragon, it rushed toward Kamehameha. Tisk! Kamehameha's face revealed a trace of disdain. Chapter 7:12. Whoosh! In midair, the air column composed of countless thick fog instantly turned into a huge demon head with 2 horns on its head. The demon head's teeth protruded out, and its eyes were blood-red. It opened its huge bloody mouth and roared down. Roar! The demon head let out a huge roar and pounced on Kamehameha fiercely, as if it would not stop until it had devoured Kamehameha. You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. At the entrance of the cave, Kamehameha, who was holding a flaming wooden stick, looked up at the horned demon swooping down from mid-air, and said disdainfully. He casually swung the burning stick in his hand behind him. Whoosh! The flames on the wooden stick instantly burst out, and the flames soared into the sky. Whoosh! Kamehameha waved his hand, and the burning charcoal stick in his hand instantly flew into the air, and went straight for the horned demon. Whoosh! When the horned demon saw Kamehameha use the same trick again, it immediately spat out a large amount of thick fog from its mouth. It had just experienced the power of Kamehameha's fire control technique, so this time it was prepared to use the thick fog to extinguish the opponent's flames before the flames reached it. Whoosh! The flames of the charcoal stick that rushed into the thick fog were instantly extinguished by the strong airflow from the demon's mouth. With a snap, the wooden stick shattered into countless sparks. Ah! The horned demon roared down, opened its huge mouth, and swallowed the wood chips that had turned into sparks all over the sky, and continued to swoop down. Seeing this situation, Kamehameha's old face showed a sly smile. He, who was sitting cross-legged in front of the fire, raised his arms and threw out both palms at the demon head in midair. At the same time, Kamehameha roared in a low voice, "A single spark makes a prairie fire." Boom! 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 As soon as Kamehameha's voice fell, the wood chips and sparks that had just been swallowed by the horned demon instantly turned into countless huge fireballs and burst open in the demon head. Roar! Woo! The demon head, which was hundreds of feet in size, instantly twisted and deformed, and let out a painful cry. At the same time, countless violent flames shot out from the head of the horned demon, and the black and gray demon head turned completely red at this time. Break! Kamehameha's palms exerted force again, and he shouted softly. Boom! With a loud sound, the horned demon that was constantly expanding and distorting in mid-air suddenly burst. Countless fireballs scattered in the air, and it was very beautiful. Oh, this is so much better! Kamehameha looked at the sky with his hands and laughed and muttered to himself. Inside the cave, Yagi Zhangqing, who was leaning against the stone wall with his saber in his arms, closed his eyes and smiled. Kamehameha. Yi Fan, who was lying on his side, closed his eyes and used his 5 senses to carefully sense all the movements in the outside world. Although he was sleeping in the cave, he knew everything that was happening in the outside world like the back of his hand. This Kamehameha was indeed powerful. He only used a piece of charcoal and a wooden stick, and he didn't even get up, and he directly repelled the opponent's aggressive moves. Moreover, his moves were clean and efficient, without any hesitation. His every move had the demeanor of a grandmaster, as expected of an elder of the Japanese martial arts world. Today, he really lived up to his reputation. Yi Fan thought to himself. He and Kamehameha were both paying attention to what was happening in the outside world. However, the Persian man was sleeping very calmly, and he was not disturbed by the outside world at all. Instead, he was snoring softly. It was so lively outside, but he could still sleep so soundly. As expected of an otherworldly expert, Yi Fan thought to himself, turned over, and continued to rest with his eyes closed. At this time, the thick fog in the sky had disappeared, as if it had never appeared. Kamehameha poked at the bonfire in front of him, and continued to meditate with his legs crossed. His mission was to keep watch, not to attack. As long as he repelled the opponent's attack, he would have completed his mission. Creak, creak. Not long after the thick fog dissipated, the strange sound was heard again. It sounded like the sound of withered branches being squeezed and twisted. It was very strange. Kamehameha frowned and opened his eyes again. He raised his gaze and looked at the coconut grove not far from the cave entrance. Under the coconut grove, countless thick tree roots broke out from the ground, and like countless strange snakes, they surged toward the cave entrance. Not only the roots, but all the vines in the bushes also seemed to be alive at this time, wriggling and crawling in this direction. Even the countless huge coconuts on the coconut trees fell to the ground with a crackling sound and rolled over. All of a sudden, all the plants within a radius of several hundred feet began to move, creaking as they moved towards the direction of the cave. Wood spirit technique? Kamehameha narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself with a frown. He didn't expect the opponent to be proficient in this technique. I couldn't tell, but you guys have some skills. Kamehameha said calmly. I'd like to see what level your wood spirit technique has reached. As Mu Wengue he spoke, he stretched out his hand, and a cross-shaped boomerang appeared in his hand, emitting a cold light. The boomerang was in the shape of a cross, and it was completely forged from stainless steel, exuding a faint, cold light. Clang! Kamehameha twisted his fingers, and the cross-shaped boomerang in his hand instantly split into three. Ting! At the same time, the three boomerangs were engulfed in raging flames. The faint blue flames appeared extremely mysterious in the pitch-black night. Whoosh! Kamehameha swung one hand, and the three flaming boomerangs instantly flew out of his hand. Clang! The three flaming boomerangs made crisp sounds as they pierced through the air, and they flew along the ground at high speed, heading directly toward the roots and vines. After releasing the flaming boomerangs, Kamehameha slowly closed his eyes. Cha-cha-cha! The three boomerangs exuding the blue flames were extremely sharp, and they instantly chopped off a large number of roots and vines that were rushing at the forefront. Whoosh! The countless roots and vines that were chopped off suddenly burst into flames, and in the blink of an eye, they were reduced to nothingness. However, there were too many roots and vines coming from all directions. After chopping off one batch, the next batch came one after another. Kamehameha, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, frowned, and his mind moved. Clang! The three boomerangs drew a beautiful blue arc in the air, and instantly merged into one. Buzz! The flaming boomerangs that had merged into one were instantly fixed in the air, and their bodies glowed brightly, emitting a dazzling blue light. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh! Countless rays of blue light shot out, transforming into countless flaming boomerangs. As hundreds and thousands of boomerangs appeared out of thin air, the situation was instantly reversed. The countless flaming boomerangs swooped down from the air, as if they had a mind of their own. At the same time, they connected to each other to form a huge blue halo, spinning down, and encircling all the plants within a radius of several hundred feet. Cha-cha-cha! Wherever the boomerangs passed, branches flew and flames raged. Within a radius of several hundred feet, all the plants were instantly turned into a sea of fire. The air was immediately filled with the smell of burning charcoal. A smile appeared on Kamehameha's face again. In less than 10 minutes, all the plants, shrubs, and coconut trees on a large area of land with the cave as the center were instantly turned into countless black ashes. It was a ghastly sight. Whoosh! Countless boomerangs overlapped and returned to the dazzling blue boomerang that was fixed in the air. Kamehameha, who was smiling, slowly opened his eyes. With a wave of his hand, the boomerang immediately flew back to his hand. What a pity for these coconuts! Kamehameha looked at the ashes around him, and as he spoke, he put the boomerang back on his waist. Phew! Just as Kamehameha heaved a sigh of relief, the sea in the distance began to change. On the surface of the sea, a huge tornado was gradually forming. The seawater was sucked into the air by the huge suction force of the tornado, forming a waterspout that was several hundred feet high and several hundred feet wide. The waterspout was so powerful that it looked like a huge dragon. It spun and rushed toward Demon Island. Bah! After seeing this, Kamehameha's expression suddenly changed. He immediately stood up from the fire and cursed in a low voice. He pulled out the jade-breaking saber that was inserted into the ground, and then strode straight to the beach. This time, the old man was infuriated. The other party had been so aggressive and had no manners at all. If he continued to tolerate it, he would be ridiculed by the other party for being incompetent. Mr. Guehi in the cave, Yi Fan sat up directly and said anxiously. He had sensed that the other party was serious this time, and it was not a small force. The European dark wizards were fighting 2 against 1. He was worried that Kamehameha would be at a disadvantage. "It's none of your business, go to sleep," Bamu Chongqing said with his eyes closed, hugging his saber and leaning against the stone wall. "But Mr. Guehi," Yi Fan said with a frown. "Sleep." Bamu Chongqing opened his eyes and looked at Yi Fan and repeated again. Yi Fan frowned and had no choice but to lie down again. "Don't worry, your Mr. Guehi is very powerful, such a small matter can't trouble him." Just as the two were talking, a tall Sadi, who had been lying there snoring, suddenly spoke. "Mr. Sadi didn't sleep?" Bamu Chongqing asked the Persian man. "How could I sleep in such a wonderful scene?" The Persian man opened his sparkling eyes and asked with a smile, "Didn't the two of you also not sleep?" Yi Fan and Bamu Chongqing looked at each other, speechless. On the sea, the violent tornadoes were getting bigger and bigger, and the column of seawater had reached more than 200 feet high. Looking from afar, it was as if the sea and the sky were connected. On the shore, Kamehameha, whose gray robe was fluttering in the wind, bit his saber in his mouth and took off the gray robe on his upper body, revealing old but extremely sturdy muscles. In the howling sea wind, the white-bearded and white-haired Kamehameha began to slowly draw his saber. Buzz. Chapter 7:13. But after the saber was unsheathed, the topless Kamehameha held the saber hilt with both hands and raised the jade-breaking saber high above his head. Buzz, the jade-breaking saber let out an excited cry, and the blade began to release a dazzling gray light. "Jade-breaking, you can release your saber aura to your heart's content this time." Kamehameha spoke to the saber in his hand with his hair and beard fluttering in the sea breeze. Boom! As soon as Kamehameha finished speaking, a dazzling gray beam of light shot up from the jade-breaking saber into the sky. The beam of light was 3 feet wide and hundreds of feet tall. It was like a gray saber piercing through the clouds. Buzz, 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 on the gigantic gray saber, countless white lights intertwined and shuttled back and forth like lightning. Yaoshi! Yaoshi! Seeing the saber aura in his hand going berserk, Kamehameha also became excited. He had never seen the jade-breaking saber so excited in the past few decades. Whoosh! On the surface of the sea, the crazily spinning sea tornado was getting closer and closer. It was less than 100 feet away from the beach. Rumble! The huge roar of the sea tornado shook the gravel on Demon Island, causing it to tremble continuously. At this time, Yi Fan and Bamu Chongqing were no longer in the mood to sleep. The two of them went straight to the entrance of the cave, focused their eyes, and looked at the sea. At this moment, Kamehameha's body was completely wrapped in a dazzling gray light. In the dark night, it was like a gray flame burning fiercely. In the flame, Kamehameha, who was holding the saber with both hands, had a gleam in his eyes. The excitement on his face was beyond words. "What a powerful saber aura!" Yi Fan said after seeing Kamehameha's saber aura. To be able to stimulate the saber aura to such a level, this Kamehameha's cultivation was really not to be trifled with. There's an old saying in the Central Plains, if you draw a sword and cut the water will still flow. Bamu Chongqing held his sword and frowned. I don't know if his sword energy can stop the other party's sea tornado. We'll see the results soon, Yi Fan said calmly. Jade breaking light slash. When the sea tornado was less than 100 feet away from the shore, Kamehameha, whose hair and beard were fluttering, suddenly let out a roar and instantly swung down the jade-breaking saber, which was filled with boundless saber aura. Whoosh! As the jade-breaking saber was swung down, the light saber that was hundreds of meters tall also swung down at the same moment, chopping down at the tornado that was hundreds of meters away at a high speed. The speed at which the blade descended was so fast that it formed a huge gray semicircular screen of light in the pitch-black Yikong. The gray light was brilliant and dazzling. Boom! Along with a thunderous boom, the hundreds of feet-long blade chi fiercely hacked into the sea tornado that connected the sky and the sea. Rumble! Evil Demon Island started shaking violently due to the shockwaves produced by the clash of their technique. Clatter! Countless rocks rolled down from the top of Evil Demon Island and landed heavily on the ground, stirring up a huge amount of dust. Looking at Kamehameha again, the huge light saber in his hand was swinging down along the sea tornado from top to bottom, sweeping everything in its path. The huge light saber was extremely powerful. Wherever it passed, the dragon-like sea tornado would be instantly split into two halves, collapsing and separating. Ah! The half-naked Kamehameha roared loudly. The strength in his hand did not decrease at all, and he swung down the light saber that was made up of countless dazzling saber auras. Whoosh! After splitting the several hundred feet tall sea tornado into two halves, the huge light saber went straight into the sea surface. Boom! After the light saber went into the sea, a huge water curtain that was almost 100 feet long suddenly rose up from the sea surface. Whoosh! The water curtain, together with the sea tornado that had been split into two halves, fell from the sky and fell into the sea, making a huge splash. In the blink of an eye, the huge and menacing sea tornado that had been coming down menacingly just a moment ago was split into two halves by Kamehameha's domineering saber aura. It was completely destroyed. The saying that cutting water with a saber makes it flow did not apply to Kamehameha. The scene before them made Bamu Chongqing's expression change. It also made Yi Fan get to know this nearly 70-years-old martial arts expert in a new light. This person's mastery of techniques and the strength of his saber aura were rarely seen in his life. No wonder Onijiro said that Kamehameha could totally be ranked in the top 3 among the experts. Seeing him today, he was indeed extraordinary. How is it? Did I say anything wrong? While Yi Fan and Bamu Chongqing were secretly admiring Kamehameha's cultivation, the Persian man, a tall Sudi, came to their side and spoke with a smile. The two of them smiled and did not speak. Seeing that the sea tornado had been destroyed, Kamehameha, who was standing on the beach, sheathed the saber in his hand, then put on his gray robe again and turned to walk to the cave halfway up the mountain. After several exchanges with the other party, Demon Island was now a mess. The ground was covered in ashes, the ground was overturned, tree branches were intertwined, and gravel was everywhere. Stepping on the ashes and gravel, Kamehameha returned to the cave. Senior Guihi, thank you for your hard work, Yi Fan said to Kamehameha. I was supposed to let everyone have a good sleep, but I ended up waking everyone up. I'm sorry, everyone. Kamehameha smiled and nodded to apologize to the three of them. Mr. Guihi, you're wrong, the Persian man said to Kamehameha. If it weren't for Mr. Guihi, I'm afraid we wouldn't even have a place to stay now. Mr. Guihi, sit down and rest. Bamu Chongqing gestured for Kamehameha to sit down. Then, he scooped a bowl of fish soup from the stone pot and handed it to Kamehameha. Ha ha! It's fine, it's fine. Kamehameha took the fish soup from Bamu Chongqing and sat cross-legged next to the fire. He smiled and said, I just stretched my muscles. It's no big deal. Mr. Guihi, after stretching your muscles, I'm afraid the European dark sorcerers won't harass us anymore. Bamu Chongqing smiled. The first 2 rounds were indeed done by the dark sorcerers, but the sea tornado that appeared later was definitely not their doing. Yi Fan, who was sitting next to Bamu Chongqing, said calmly while adding firewood to the fire. You mean to say? Bamu Chongqing frowned and asked Yi Fan. That ocean traveler is back, Yi Fan said calmly. It's him. Kamehameha, who was drinking half of the fish soup, was shocked when he heard Yi Fan say this. He wants us to mistakenly think that the sea tornado was done by the dark sorcerers and lure us to seek revenge. He wants to watch us fight while he reaps the benefits, Yi Fan continued. Why, just as Yi Fan finished speaking, the sound of huge waves could be heard from the distant sea. This time, the sound of the waves was different from the previous one. The previous sea tornado was fierce and fast, and the sound was loud and resounding. However, this time, the sound of the waves was deep and loud, as if they could topple mountains and overturn seas. After hearing this sound, Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing's expressions changed drastically. They were Japanese, so they couldn't be more familiar with this voice. Tsunami! It was a tsunami! Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing were shocked. The 2 of them didn't have time to think. They immediately stood up from beside the fire and quickly walked out of the cave. Yi Fan and the Persian man also noticed that something was amiss and quickly followed the 2 of them out of the cave. When the 4 of them arrived outside the cave, the scene in front of them made their faces turn pale. Even Yi Fan frowned and narrowed his eyes. On the surface of the sea in the distance, the surging waves were gradually rising. The waves were more than 1,000 feet high. This time, the scene was completely different from the previous sea tornado. Although the previous sea tornado was terrifying, it was only a tornado after all. The area it occupied wasn't much. However, this time it was very different. This time, the entire sea level was rising rapidly. It was obvious that Kamehameha's move had completely infuriated Ocean Traveler. He used his water-controlling technique to the extreme and wanted to use the surging waves to drown the entire demon island and destroy it completely. Facing such a grand scene, Kamehameha, Bamu Chongqing, and even the Persian man didn't know what to do. No matter how high their cultivation was, they couldn't compete with the entire sea. It seems like we have to leave Demon Island now, Kamehameha said seriously as he looked at the rising sea level in the distance. He could use the jade severing saber to sever the sea tornadoes connecting the sky and the sea, but his move was completely useless against the rising sea. We can leave, but once we leave, this demon island will be completely destroyed. It's very likely that it will turn into rocks and sink into the sea, Bamu Chongqing said with a frown. If that's the case, tomorrow's flame meteor might not fall here. The killing intent of the flame meteor and the baleful energy that had gathered on Fiend Island for a few hundreds of years attracted each other, and it was precisely because of this that the flame meteor had descended here. Once Fiend Island was destroyed, the flame meteor would lose the guidance of the baleful energy on Fiend Island and would definitely descend elsewhere. In that case, everything they had done before would be in vain. It seems like I won't be able to catch this monkey, the Persian man said with a sigh. Once Demon Island was destroyed, the evil Chi of the demon that hadn't left the island would dissipate, and he would turn into ashes. The 15 years that he had waited bitterly would be in vain. What good will it do him if he destroys Demon Island? Kamehameha said with a frown. Once this island is destroyed, he won't be able to determine where the flame meteor will fall. Senior, you're wrong, Yi Fan said with a serious expression. The destruction of Demon Island will bring us a lot of trouble, but it won't affect him at all. As long as the flame meteor falls into the sea, he'll be able to get it immediately. What a cunning guy! Kamehameha cursed. Just now, he had used both the special technique and the saber art. His goal was to guard the cave. Now, he even had to abandon the entire island. We can't abandon this island. We have to protect it. Yi Fan said calmly as he looked at the vast sea in the distance that was surging wildly and constantly rising. When Yi Fan said this, the other three were shocked. You want to stop this tsunami by yourself? Kamehameha looked at Yi Fan and asked. It's not just me. Now, everyone on Demon Island has to join forces to protect the island, Yi Fan said. When the three heard this, they were instantly enlightened. Wizard Kim Yaodong. 2 dark warlocks. If we don't join forces now, none of us will be able to get the flame meteor. Yi Fan mobilized his spiritual energy and said loudly. Yi Fan's voice was extremely loud, and it echoed endlessly. In an instant, it spread to every corner of Demon Island. Whoosh, not long after Yi Fan's words left his mouth, 3 figures instantly appeared in midair behind the 4 of them. Chapter 7:14. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. After the 3 of them appeared, they instantly descended from the sky and stood in front of the 4 people. Kim Yaodong frowned, while the 2 European dark sorcerers looked solemn. They were well aware of the extremely urgent situation before them. Yi Fan was right. If they did not join forces now, none of them would be able to obtain the flaming meteor. How do we join forces? Kim Yaodong directly asked Yi Fan. It's very simple, Yi Fan replied calmly. We'll work together to prevent the seawater from flooding Demon Island. After this, we'll do our own things as before. As Yi Fan spoke, he looked at the 2 dark sorcerers who were dressed in black robes and held brooms in their hands. The 2 dark sorcerers looked at each other and nodded. Then, they looked at Kim Yaodong. Okay, we'll do as you say. Kim Yaodong thought for a moment and agreed to Yi Fan's suggestion. In that case, we'll cast spells to protect the island now, Kamehameha said. The rapidly rising seawater was now only a few dozen miles away from them, and it was moving at an extremely fast speed. If they did not cast spells now, Demon Island would soon be washed away by the overwhelming waves in an instant. I'll block the first wave of seawater. When the seawater passes over Demon Island, I'll use cold air to instantly freeze it and set up an ice dome, Yi Fan said and turned his head to look at the 2 European dark sorcerers. Sorcerers, you're proficient in wood spirit spells. When I use cold air to freeze the seawater, you can mobilize all the trees and wild vines on the island to support the ice dome and prevent the ice layer from being crushed by the seawater. After hearing Yi Fan's words, the 2 dark sorcerers whispered to each other. Then, they looked at Yi Fan and slowly nodded. After Yi Fan finished speaking to the 2 dark sorcerers, he turned his head and asked Kamehameha, Senior Guihe, you're proficient in 5 element spells. Can you use earth-splitting spell to pile up a few hills to help the 2 dark sorcerers support the ice dome? That's not a problem. Leave it to me, Kamehameha nodded and said. Venerable Master Jean, I've heard that your special technique is outstanding and your 1,000-man technique is unrivaled. Yi Fan looked at Jean Yaodong and continued, later, when the 4 of us are casting our spells, Venerable Master, you can act according to the situation. You can check for any flaws and help protect the island. Okay, Kim Yaodong replied briefly. Brother Bamu, when the seafarer uses the seawater to attack Demon Island, it's very likely that he has a backup plan. Those killer crabs from before are the best proof. Yi Fan turned his head and said to Bamu Chongqing, when we cast spells, I'll leave those messy troubles to you. Don't worry, I'll take care of it, Bamu Chongqing said calmly to Yi Fan. In that case, I think we can start now, Yi Fan said calmly as he looked at the huge waves in the distance. Whoosh, on the surface of the sea, the waves had already reached a height of more than 2,000 feet. It was like an endless wall of water, sweeping toward Demon Island from all directions. Whoosh, Yi Fan used his body movement skill. His body instantly disappeared and appeared on the beach out of thin air. What a fast body movement skill! Seeing this, the pupils of the 2 European black wizards in black robes suddenly shrank. They thought that their body movement skills were already at the peak of perfection. However, compared to this young man in front of them, they were simply dwarfed. Kim Yaodong frowned and was shocked. This young man was indeed the reincarnation of Eldritch, who was able to defeat the 6 immortals. Just his body movement skill alone was so fast. It seemed that he was very likely to lose this bet to this person. The 3 of them were shocked, but the situation was critical, and they had no time to think. The burly male adept with a pointed hat faced the sea. He then used the brown broom in his hand to draw a circle about 7 feet wide with the witch at the center. Buzz, the moment the circle closed, countless rays of black light shot out from the circle, dazzling everyone's eyes. Within the black circle, the blonde witch with blue eyes and a beautiful face slowly bent down and gently pressed the ground in the center of the circle with her snow-white right hand. Buzz, the moment the witch's palm touched the ground, 6 rays of white light instantly spread out from the witch's palm. The 6 rays of light were extremely bright and dazzling, illuminating the witch in the center with white light. Buzz, the 6 rays of light quickly shrunk and turned into 6 spots of light, evenly distributed on the 7-foot circle of black light. Diet. Wakula. Sodom. Gamala. The witch closed her beautiful eyes and softly chanted a spell. Buzz, as the witch chanted, the 6 dazzling white spots of light embedded in the black circle of light suddenly shone brightly. Swish. Swish. Swish, the 6 spots of light shot out 6 rays of white light at an extremely fast speed, connecting head to tail. In the blink of an eye, a dazzling hexagram appeared within the black circle of light. Hexagram array. The knowledgeable Kamehameha saw this and blurted out in shock. Rumble. The moment the hexagram array appeared, the entire demon island began to tremble slightly. Crash. Crack, as the light of the hexagram grew brighter and brighter, countless thick roots and vines broke through the ground of Demon Island. These thick roots and vines seemed to have been injected with chicken blood as they continuously surged out from the ground, intertwining with each other and reaching into the air. In an instant, all the plants on Demon Island were mobilized by the witch's spell. Kamehameha was secretly shocked when he saw this. It was obvious that the witch had not used her full strength when fighting with them earlier. She only wanted to drive them out of Demon Island. To be able to mobilize all the plants on Demon Island with her own strength, this pair of European black magi's cultivation was indeed unfathomable. At this moment, the male magus reached out and grabbed a handful of fine sand from the ground. He then chanted and scattered the fine sand into the air. Buzz, the golden sand in the sky, instantly emitted a golden brilliance. Shah, the golden sand exploded in the air and turned into glittering fragments of light, landing on all the plants that were constantly surging out. Creak, crack, creak, as the golden sand poured down, the plants on the ground instantly began to swell and become extremely thick. Even the vines that were as thick as a thumb became as thick as a wrist. It's my turn. As Kamehameha spoke, he stabbed the jade-severing saber into the ground and began to form hand seals. Swish, the hand seals that Kamehameha formed were extremely complicated and fast. In just a short while, over 100 hand seals had been formed. Earth-splitting technique. Earth dragon soaring. After forming the last hand seal, Kamehameha lowered his body and roared as he slammed his right palm heavily on the ground. Bang, stone fragments flew everywhere and soil splashed everywhere. Kamehameha's right arm instantly pierced a foot deep into the hard ground. Boom, boom, boom on the ground that was constantly trembling. 7 huge pillars that were more than 10 feet thick and made up of countless pieces of sand and soil suddenly broke out of the ground like giant dragons. Amidst the loud rumbling sounds and under everyone's stunned gazes, 7 towering stone pillars towered over Demon Island, each of them tens of feet tall. Looking at these 7 huge stone pillars, the 2 European dark magi's expressions changed slightly. They had indeed not used their full strength earlier, But Kamehameha had not used his full strength either. This Japanese expert looked extremely old, but in reality, he was extremely powerful and extremely difficult to deal with. "Get ready, it's coming." Yi Fan, who was standing by the sea with his back facing everyone, reminded everyone with a cold gaze. Boom! 1 mile away from the Demon Island, a huge wave that could topple mountains and overturn seas let out earth-shaking rumbling sounds, and it smashed fiercely toward the Demon Island. Kim Yaodong narrowed his eyes and secretly gathered his strength, ready to attack. Bamu Chongqing gripped the saber in his hand tightly, his expression cold and his gaze sharp like a knife. Boom! The monstrous wave was extremely fast, and the distance of 1 mile was covered in the blink of an eye. At this moment, the 2,000 feet tall wave was less than 100 feet away from Yi Fan. Yi Fan slowly closed his eyes. Buzz! A spot of light instantly lit up in Yi Fan's arms. He was activating the water avoidance pearl in his arms. Previously, when he used the water avoidance pearl, he did not use much spiritual energy to activate it, because the water avoidance pearl was a secret treasure that repelled water. When surrounded by water, the pearl would automatically form a spherical barrier to protect the treasure holder. However, this time was different from the past. This time, he not only wanted to protect himself, but also the entire Demon Island. This time, he wanted to use his supreme spiritual energy to activate the water avoidance pearl, allowing the entire sea to bypass Demon Island. Whoosh! When the monstrous wave was less than 100 feet away from Yi Fan instantly opened his eyes. In his eagle eyes, a 7-colored brilliance flowed. He wanted to use the spiritual energy of the Phoenix Dance's 9th heaven to activate the water avoidance pearl. Buzz! As the overbearing 7-colored spiritual energy instantly condensed on the water avoidance pearl in Yi Fan's arms, a huge semicircular ball of light instantly exploded. The semicircular ball of light expanded extremely fast, almost in the blink of an eye. This time, the ball of light was no longer translucent, but was surrounded by 7 colors, dazzling and dazzling. In the blink of an eye, the huge water avoidance pearl had covered the entire Demon Island. Boom! The monstrous wave that blotted out the sky and covered the earth immediately fell heavily on the 7-colored water avoidance pearl, making an earth-shattering sound. Rumble! The Demon Island within the 7-colored water avoidance pearl instantly shook violently. Inside the pearl, everyone's eyes widened, and they stared dumbfoundedly at the torrential wave leaping over their heads. Now is the time. Seeing that the seawater had completely covered the water-repelling light shield in an instant, Yi Fan had an idea. He used 30% of the spiritual energy in his energy reserve to activate the icy cold Niden in his body. Then, he threw both of his palms at the seawater outside the water-repelling light shield. Boom! 2 dazzling and dazzling cold light beams shot out from Yi Fan's palms, shooting toward the torrential wave above his head. The cold light beams were only 5 inches thick when they were shot out, but when they hit the water outside the pearl, they were already 3 feet thick. Crack! 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 Under the activation of 30% of the spiritual energy of the Phoenix Dance's 9th heaven, the water outside the pearl was instantly frozen, turning into a huge ice shell that was more than 3 feet thick. Whoosh! Yi Fan used the cold light beam to sweep back and forth inside the pearl. Wherever the light beam passed, it instantly turned into thick and heavy ice. Chapter 7:15. Rise. Seeing that Yi Fan had finished setting up the icy dome in an instant, Kamehameha immediately changed his hand seals and shouted loudly. Rumble, the island shook, and 7 towering stone pillars suddenly rose and rushed towards the icy dome. Boom, 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 the 7 stone pillars firmly supported the icy dome. Masada, Kamala, the witch chanted softly as she slammed the broom into the hexagram array under her feet. 1. Asterisk the hexagram array shone brightly, and a white light rushed towards the sky. Asterisk whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Asterisk countless thick tree roots and vines soared into the sky, twisting into hundreds of thick pillars and pushing towards the icy dome. Asterisk bang, bang, bang. Asterisk the vines and wooden pillars firmly supported the dome. In the blink of an eye, the icy dome was firmly supported by the spell formations set up by the two of them. Yi Fan's plan could be said to be perfect. Although he had used the ice serpent's core to set up the icy dome, which was 30 feet thick and as hard as steel, it could not guarantee that it would be foolproof. It had to be known that the icy dome was covered with a large amount of seawater that weighed several million kilograms. Coupled with the force of the seawater falling from a height of several thousand feet, it could produce an impact force of several million kilograms. In the face of such a huge force, Yi Fan did not dare to guarantee that the icy dome would be able to withstand the impact. In fact, he could have used more spiritual energy to thicken the icy dome, but he was cautious and did not do so. Tomorrow was the day of the falling meteor, and he had to conserve most of his spiritual energy to prevent the meteor from falling into the sea. This was also one of the reasons why he wanted to join forces with the other experts to fight against the High Jonka. Besides that, there was another important reason. That was that he could use this opportunity to see the true skills of the European Dark Magi and Kim Yaodong. After tonight, they would no longer be partners, but opponents. As strong competitors, it was important to understand the true strength of the other party. He could not detect any aura from Kim Yaodong, and the Dark Magi's aura was the exact opposite. It was all-encompassing. One had no aura while the other had a complex aura. It was not easy to deal with them. Asterisk crack, just as everyone heaved a sigh of relief and marveled at the wonders of the opponent's spell, a crack appeared at the very top of the dome of ice. Seeing this, everyone's expression changed greatly. The ice dome, which was several zhang thick and extremely hard, was supported by 7 stone pillars and more than 100 rattan pillars, but it still couldn't withstand the impact of the seawater. Yi Fan frowned when he saw this. He activated his icy Niden once more and slammed his palm towards the crack in the dome. Chi, a cold beam of light shot out from Yi Fan's palm and struck the crack in the dome. Crack, crack, crack. With the timely replenishment of the cold air, the cracks on the dome slowly disappeared and gradually recovered. Crack, crack. Just as Yi Fan sealed this area, fine cracks began to appear in several other areas of the dome. Yi Fan took action again, using the cold air to seal it off. Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing looked at each other solemnly. The two dark sorcerers furrowed their brows and remained silent. At this moment, there was nothing they could do to help. Looking at the cracks that kept appearing on the dome, Jin Yaodong was worried. The seawater was still rising. If this continued, no matter how sturdy the dome of ice was, it would not be able to withstand the immense pressure. It was only a matter of time before the dome shattered. Asterisk crack crack. Asterisk just as everyone was worried, several large cracks began to spread from the top of the dome, quickly spreading in all directions. Asterisk bang, bang, bang. With a few loud sounds, more than 10 large chunks of ice fell from the top of the dome. The dome of ice was beginning to crack. Asterisk poo, poo, poo. More than 10 pillars of seawater shot out from the holes in the ice. Asterisk whoosh, whoosh. Asterisk Yi Fan extended both his palms and continuously released cold air into the holes in the ice. However, the pressure of the seawater was too strong. Just as Yi Fan blocked the holes, the seawater under the high pressure broke through the holes again. Let's go help. Kamehameha, who was below the dome, saw the situation and immediately shouted as he leaped into the air and flew towards the dome. Although he could not release cold air, he could not just stand by and watch. Asterisk boom. Asterisk Kamehameha, who was in the air, circulated his spiritual energy and attacked the pillars of seawater that had broken through the dome. Asterisk boom boom boom. The thick pillars of seawater instantly stopped leaking out. Kamehameha was proficient in all 5 elemental spells, and naturally, he was also proficient in water manipulation. However, as the saying goes, there is nothing to be afraid of if you do not know the value of the goods, but rather the value of the goods. His mastery of water manipulation was indeed very high, and it was not difficult for him to set up a wall of water that was more than 100 feet tall. However, compared to Haijonka, his mastery of water manipulation was like child's play. Haijonka's mastery of water manipulation had reached the level where he could control the entire sea. His mastery of water manipulation had reached the pinnacle, and no one could surpass him. Therefore, even though Kamehameha was an expert in water manipulation, he could only barely resist the pillars of seawater. The moment Kamehameha made his move, Bamuchangching also made his move. With a flash of his shadow, he used his supreme movement skill and instantly leaped into the air, flying towards the other ice caves on the dome. At the same time, Yagi Zhangqing swiftly took off the white ninja robe that he was wearing outside. Then, he gently brushed the robe in his hand with a single hand. *ting*, under Yagi Long Kiyoshi's gentle touch, the soft and smooth white ninja uniform instantly became stiff, flat, and straight. White Shura! Yagi Long Kiyoshi shouted as he hurled the ninja's white robe at the holes where seawater was pouring out of. *bang! Just as Bamuchangching's voice fell, the ninja robe that was thrown out of his hand instantly became full, as if there was an invisible person wearing it. What was even more incredible was that in the process of flying towards the ice caves, the bulging white ninja robe began to become bigger and bigger. When it reached the dome, the ninja robe had already become dozens of times bigger, reaching the size of a few hundred feet. Boom! 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 With a few loud sounds, the ninja robe seemed to have come to life and used its huge body to block the dozens of ice caves. Looking at Bamuchangching again, his direction did not change, and his speed did not decrease. He continued to soar into the air. Bamuchangching caught a huge piece of ice that had been washed down from the air, and then rushed into the raging seawater pillars. He used the huge ice block to block the seawater pillars, and then fiercely used his movement skill to go against the flow of the seawater pillars. Bang! Bamuchangching's strength was extremely great, and in an instant, the huge ice block in his hand was once again embedded in the ice caves. Throughout the entire process, Bamuchangching was extremely natural and unrestrained, without any sloppiness. The 2 European dark magi looked at each other and nodded in tacit understanding. The 2 quickly turned the 2 brown brooms upside down, the handles facing down, and the brooms facing up, and heavily inserted them into the ground. The beautiful female magus took out a transparent crystal bottle filled with green liquid from her bosom, then opened the cork and lightly dripped a few drops onto the 2 brooms. After being nourished by the mysterious liquid, the 2 brooms that were inserted into the ground immediately seemed to come to life, and began to take root and sprout, growing taller and taller. Crack! Crack! In less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the 2 ordinary brooms that were more than 7 feet tall had instantly turned into towering trees that were more than 10 feet thick. Samantha! Nakula! The female magus raised her head and began to loudly chant an incantation. Shwa! 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 Countless lush branches intertwined and extended into nearly 100 huge ice caves, preventing the seawater from flowing in. All the experts had made their moves, except for one person, Kim Yaodong. He had been standing there all along, his eyes cold as he watched everything that was happening in front of him. Yi Fan, on the other hand, continued to use the cold air to fill up the cracks without batting an eyelid. In fact, with his cultivation, he could completely strengthen the icy dome by several times in an instant, not to mention such a trivial matter as blocking the ice caves. The reason why he did this was to force Kim Yaodong to make a move. As long as Kim Yaodong made a move, he would be able to sense the opponent's spiritual aura, and from there, find out how deep his cultivation was. In other words, he had purposely created this situation that was riddled with holes. While ensuring that Demon Island would not be destroyed, he had also lured Kim Yaodong to make a move. However, it was obvious that Kim Yaodong was also on guard against Yi Fan. He was reluctant to make a move because he was worried that Yi Fan would be able to see the characteristics of his technique. His opponent was the reincarnation of the famous Eldritch, so he had to be careful. He had already drawn a red line for himself. As long as Yi Fan's icy dome did not shatter to the point where it would affect the safety of Demon Island, he would definitely not make a move. Protecting Demon Island was a small matter, but obtaining the flame meteor was a big matter. Yi Fan glanced at Kim Yaodong, who was still on the ground, from the corner of his eyes, and guessed Kim Yaodong's thoughts. It seemed that he had to continue to set up this situation. Whoosh, as Yi Fan thought to himself. He extended one of his palms towards another ice cave and released a stream of cold air. On the surface, this cold air was extremely cold and was completely the same as the cold air from before. However, in reality, there was a hidden meaning behind this cold air. This was because Yi Fan had secretly added a strand of spiritual energy into the cold air. His original intention was to mend this ice cave, but in reality, he wanted to enlarge this ice cave. Only in this way could he force Kim Yaodong to make a move. Crack crack crack. After Yi Fan's cold air rushed into the ice cave was instantly sealed. However, right after that, the strand of spiritual energy within the cold air began to take effect. Crack crack cracks appeared again. Bang, a huge pillar of seawater gushed out from the ice cave once again. This time, the size of the ice hole was more than twice the size of the previous one. Bang bang bang, the violent influx of seawater caused a chain reaction, and the other areas of the dome that had been filled up were once again broken. Chapter 7:16. Swoosh. Kim Yaodong, who had been standing below without moving, suddenly disappeared into thin air. At this moment, he could no longer watch with folded arms. Yi Fan's ice dome had reached its limit. If he did not make a move, the entire Demon Island would be destroyed. Swoosh. Kim Yaodong's figure instantly appeared below the ice dome, next to Yi Fan. What a fast movement technique! Seeing Kim Yaodong appear next to him, Yi Fan was shocked. As the saying goes, once an expert makes a move, one will know whether or not he is an expert. No wonder this Kim Yaodong dared to make a deal with him. His movement technique was indeed impressive. Kim Yaodong, who was floating in midair, turned around and said to Yi Fan, "Mr. Yi, get me some ice. The bigger the better." Hearing Kim Yaodong's words, Yi Fan nodded. Obviously, Kim Yaodong was going to make a move. Thinking of this, Yi Fan raised his palms to the sky and activated the ice core in his body, quickly condensing the frost energy. Buzz, 270 large balls of cold air instantly condensed in the center of Yi Fan's palms. The cold energy ball overflowed with cold smoke and white mist. It was incomparably cold and radiant, dazzling everyone's eyes. Swoosh. After the balls of frost energy were condensed, Yi Fan pushed his palms upwards. The two balls of frost energy instantly left his hands and rushed into the water column, going against the current. Crack! Crack! The balls of frost energy went against the current. Wherever they went, the seawater would explode and instantly condense into countless huge ice cubes, crashing down. The ice cubes had already condensed. Next, it was up to Kim Yaodong. Yi Fan thought to himself as he turned around to look at Kim Yaodong. Kim Yaodong slowly closed his eyes. Buzz. As he closed his eyes, countless resplendent white lights burst out from Kim Yaodong's body. Its brilliance was dazzling and its spiritual pressure was tyrannical, rarely seen in the world. Within the 10,000 rays of white light, Kim Yaodong's eyes drooped slightly. His white robes fluttered in the wind as if he was a deity. What a strong spiritual pressure! The moment Kim Yaodong released his spiritual pressure, Yi Fan immediately sensed Kim Yaodong's aura and strength. Not only was this person's spirit qi extremely pure and profound, there was also a very powerful golden humanoid spirit qi in his sea of qi. The power contained within the golden figure's spirit energy was extremely domineering, and it was close to the power of a celestial. It was no wonder that Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing valued this person so much. This person was truly a top-notch expert. He definitely lived up to his reputation. Salvation of all spirits, technique of 1,000 people. Just as Yi Fan was shocked by the golden humanoid spirit qi in Kim Yaodong's sea of qi, Kim Yaodong, who had been looking down, suddenly opened his eyes and shouted softly. Buzz! As soon as Kim Yaodong's voice fell, countless humanoid shadows spread out from his body. After these humanoid shadows left Kim Yaodong's body, they instantly turned into real bodies. These people who had turned into real bodies could be said to be exactly the same as Kim Yaodong. They wore the same clothes, had the same figure and appearance, and even the expressions on their faces were exactly the same. Whoosh! 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 In the blink of an eye, hundreds and thousands of Kim Yaodong appeared out of thin air, floating in the air. The scene was extremely shocking. Kamehameha's eyes were wide open, Bamu Chongqing was in disbelief. The Persian man's expression changed greatly, and the European wizard frowned deeply. Kim Yaodong's technique of 1,000 people could be said to be worthy of its name, and it was an eye-opener for them. Yi Fan's face was full of shock, and the degree of shock in his heart was no less than the others. The number of experts who could create clones could be said to be innumerable. Not to mention those who were far away, Muan Tortoise, Crane, and Yagi Long Kiyoshi could create clones, and there were dozens of them. In detail, this doppelganger technique was not a rare technique for Japanese ninjutsu, and even ordinary jounin could do it. But then again, this doppelganger technique seemed to be extremely powerful and could instantly multiply one's combat power, but in fact, it was not so. At the same time as the doppelgangers were created, the strength would also be divided at the same time. If there were 2 doppelgangers, half of the strength would be divided. If there were 3 doppelgangers, each doppelganger would only have 1/3 of the strength. In other words, the more doppelgangers there were, the less strength there would be. Therefore, unless there was no other choice, one should never use the doppelganger technique, or they would be defeated by the opponent one by one. However, this Kim Yaodong in front of him was different. He already had more than 1,000 doppelgangers. The number was so large that it was unbelievable. What was even more shocking was that all of his doppelgangers were exactly the same as his original body, and there was no loss of cultivation. In other words, Kim Yaodong's 1,000 doppelganger technique had directly increased his combat power by more than 1,000 times in a short period of time. Yi Fan was expressionless as he narrowed his eyes and sized up the countless Kim Yaodong floating in the air around him. Even though these Kim Yaodong were almost exactly the same, he still saw some clues. In the original body beside him, the golden human-shaped spiritual energy in the sea of qi had shrunk by more than 10 times, and its spiritual energy was not as strong as before. In the other doppelganger's sea of qi, there was no golden human-shaped spiritual energy at all, only bits of golden light. In other words, Kim Yaodong's 1,000 doppelganger technique was ultimately to disperse the original body's spiritual energy. However, what was being dispersed was not Kim Yaodong's own spiritual energy, but the golden human-shaped spiritual energy. It could be seen that the golden human-shaped spiritual energy in Kim Yaodong's sea of qi was the same as the 2 inner cores in his body. They were both from the outside world, and not from Kim Yaodong's cultivation. The reason was very simple. The spiritual energy in Kim Yaodong's sea of qi was completely different from the golden human-shaped spiritual energy. So it was like this. Yi Fan thought in his heart. It seemed that this Kim Yaodong was also a person who had a fortuitous encounter. After the 1,000 doppelganger technique was executed, Kim Yaodong's original body stretched out his arm and pointed at the shattered ice dome above him. Shwa shwa shwa, thousands of Kim Yaodong floating in the air used their movement techniques at the same time and rushed towards the various ice holes. In an instant, the white figures were everywhere, and their white robes fluttered, covering the sky and the sun. Pa pa pa, thousands of Kim Yaodong each caught a large number of huge ice cubes that fell heavily from midair, and then used their amazing movement techniques to hold the huge ice cubes with both hands and moved against the flow of the seawater column at high speed. Hua! The seawater column scattered in all directions, and water splashed everywhere. Bang bang bang, along with the loud noise, all the ice holes were blocked by thousands of Kim Yaodong's doppelgangers in the blink of an eye. At this time, Yi Fan had completely explored Kim Yaodong's strength and the characteristics of his move. Naturally, there was no need to delay any longer. He alternated between releasing cold air from his palms and completely sealed all the huge ice cubes embedded in the ice holes to prevent them from being washed away by the seawater again. Hua! The overwhelming seawater continued to wash over the crystal-clear ice dome, and in the blink of an eye, it passed through the dome and rushed towards the back of Demon Island. At this time, thousands of Kim Yaodong's doppelgangers were firmly holding the ice dome with both hands, and the other experts were forcibly using their own techniques to support the ice dome. The Persian man looked around vigilantly, in order to prevent Hai Zhonka from using the spirit-controlling technique to launch a sneak attack on them. Originally, Bamu Chongqing was in charge of guarding the dome, but at this time, Bamu Chongqing was already supporting the dome, and he had no time to do anything else. Naturally, this task fell on his head. However, Yi Fan was not worried about Hai Zhonka's sneak attack. The reason was simple. The seawater covering the dome of ice had begun to recede, and the pressure on the dome of ice was gradually decreasing. This could be seen from the small cracks on the dome of ice that were gradually mending themselves. Controlling the seawater for my use naturally consumes a lot of spiritual energy. No matter how powerful Hai Zhonka's cultivation is, he won't be able to support it for too long. Moreover, the greatest power of the spirit-controlling technique is at the moment when the seawater falls heavily on the dome. As long as I can withstand the initial impact, everything else will be easy. Hua! After passing through Demon Island, which was covered by the ice dome, the seawater started to recede. After the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, the ice dome started to appear on the surface of the sea. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, the surface of the sea became calm again. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Seeing that the danger was over, Kim Yaodong's doppelgangers activated their movement techniques at the same time and quickly returned to their original bodies, turning into one Kim Yaodong. At the same time, the other experts also started to withdraw their technique. With a loud rumbling sound, Kamehameha withdrew the 7 huge stone pillars, and the pair of European dark sorcerers also withdrew all the branches, vines, and the 2 magical brooms. Bamu Chongqing withdrew his white robe and put it back on his body. Everything returned to normal. The experts slowly landed on the ground. All the experts withdrew their techniques except for Yi Fan. He didn't withdraw to the ice dome. There was still some time before daybreak. With the ice dome, they would have a barrier to prevent the ocean guest from attacking again, even though the possibility of that happening was very slim. Now that we're done here, it's time for us to part ways and go our separate ways, Kim Yaodong said to Yi Fan. Mr. Yi, don't forget about tomorrow's appointment. Don't worry, Wizard Jean. How could I forget? Yi Fan replied with a smile. Kim Yaodong smiled and tapped the ground with the tip of his foot. His body rose into the air, and he flew toward the back of Demon Island. Demon Island is safe. It's time for us to leave, the European sorcerer said to Yi Fan in very stiff Mandarin. Yi Fan nodded at him. The female sorcerer smiled at Yi Fan, then stepped onto the broom and slowly left the ground, flying toward the east of Demon Island. The European sorcerer followed closely behind and flew into the air. I wonder what the situation will be like tomorrow, Kamehameha said with a frown as he watched the three of them disappear into the distance. All three of them were very skilled in sorcery and were extremely difficult to deal with, especially Kim Yaodong. His cultivation level was so high that no one had ever seen it before. No one knew what would happen when the fiery meteor fell tomorrow. Our plan remains the same. We'll do as we said before. Yi Fan turned to look at Kamehameha and said, "What we need to do now is rest well and conserve our energy. We'll obtain the fiery meteor at noon tomorrow." Kamehameha nodded slowly after hearing this. "Tomorrow, focus on your battle with Kim Yaodong. Leave the rest to us," Bamu Chongqing said to Yi Fan. Chapter 717. The next morning. Demon Island. Above the wide sea, huge waves surged and surged. At this time, the ice dome had already been removed by Yi Fan, and the waves slapped on the reefs around Demon Island, creating loud crashing sounds. Perhaps it was a coincidence or some other reason, but at this time, the sky was covered with dark clouds, covering the sun. Yi Fan stood on a flat boulder outside the cave and looked up at the sky, observing the strange movements in the sky. Although the Persian man had said that the fire meteor would only fall toward Demon Island at noon, it was still possible for the fire meteor to fall earlier or later. It was not impossible for the fire meteor to fall earlier or later. At this time, he had already made all the preparations and was only waiting for the appearance of the meteor. Kim Yaodong and the two European dark magi were also looking up at the sky on Demon Island. Kim Yaodong sat cross-legged in an open space in the distance, resting with his eyes closed, not moving at all. In front of him, there was a small finger-sized golden sandalwood stick stuck in the ground. The sandalwood stick had been lit, and the aroma was overflowing. Green smoke rose in spirals and slowly drifted away. The two European dark magi were sitting under a coconut grove on the other side of Demon Island. In front of them, there was a flat, withered tree stump that was more than a foot tall. Above the tree stump, a sparkling and translucent crystal ball was suspended, slowly rotating. The two dark magi stared at the crystal ball with full concentration, not daring to be careless. The three forces were using their own methods to investigate the appearance of the meteor. Everything in the sky was normal, and there were no strange movements. Yi Fan looked up at the sky for a while, and then returned to the cave. He had just used his eyesight to penetrate the clouds and go straight to the sky, but he didn't find any signs of the meteor, nor did he sense any strange heat source. It seemed that the meteor was still a long distance away from Demon Island. How was it? After Yi Fan entered the cave, Kamehameha, who was sitting cross-legged, asked Yi Fan. His and Bamu Chongqing's eyesight was far inferior to Yi Fan's. Instead of going out to observe the strange phenomenon in the sky, they might as well close their eyes and rest. Yi Fan shook his head as a reply. "You don't have to be too nervous," Bamu Chongqing, who was sitting across from Kamehameha, said to Yi Fan. "With your current spiritual power, you should be able to perceive the fire meteor in advance. It won't be too late for you to make your move then." Yi Fan nodded after hearing that. "Don't worry. This old man's predictions have always been accurate. That flaming meteor will definitely arrive on schedule," a tall Suddy said with his eyes closed as he leaned against the stone wall. Yi Fan smiled and sat down cross-legged, concealing his spirit and qi. At the same time, he spread out his five senses and sensed everything that was happening in the outside world. The experts were all displaying their own abilities, quietly waiting for the appearance of the flame meteor. 6 hours passed by quickly, and in the blink of an eye, it was noon. At this moment, more than half of the sandalwood incense in front of Kim Yao Dong had been burned, and there were less than 3 inches left. The crystal ball of the European black sorcerers had also begun to shine, emitting a dazzling white light. Buzz, just as Yi Fan was concealing his spirit and chi, the fire snake's dragon ball, which had been slowly circling in his energy reserve, suddenly sped up and became somewhat irritated. Yi Fan was shocked and suddenly opened his eyes. The fire snake's dragon ball had sensed the heat emitted by the flame meteor, which was why it had become irritable. In other words, the flame meteor was not far from here. Thinking of this, Yi Fan stood up and quickly walked out of the cave. Bamu Chongqing and Kamehameha saw Yi Fan suddenly stand up and knew that there was a reason for this. They also stood up and followed Yi Fan out of the cave. The 3 of them stood side by side and raised their heads to look at the sky. In the eyes of Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing, everything in the sky was the same as before. However, in Yi Fan's eyes it was far from that simple. He could faintly feel a domineering heat gradually approaching them. Amidst the scorching heat, a murderous aura rose. It was the flame meteor. Yi Fan's eyes instantly widened. Qi. The sandalwood incense that was less than 3 inches in front of Kim Yao Dong suddenly began to burn rapidly, and in an instant it reached the end. Kim Yao Dong suddenly opened his eyes. Buzz, at the same time, a red dot suddenly appeared on the crystal ball floating in front of the black sorcerers, and it gradually approached the center of the crystal ball. Seeing this, the 2 black sorcerers were instantly overjoyed. In an instant, all 3 parties received news of the flame meteor's descent. Kim Yao Dong quickly stood up. He glanced at the clouds, and then turned to look at Yi Fan. Yi Fan turned to look at Kim Yao Dong, and then looked at the sky. The 2 European black sorcerers stood up, holding brooms in their hands, and smiled as they looked at the sky. They already knew the current distance, falling angle, and falling direction of the flame meteor from the crystal ball. As long as the flame meteor fell on Demon Island, they would immediately snatch it. Kim Yao Dong was also waiting for this moment. He had already thought it through. When the flame meteor was less than 100 feet away from Demon Island, he would use the 1,000 men technique that made him famous to slow down the flame meteor. With the power of the 1,000 men technique, it should be able to reduce the huge impact of the flame meteor. At that time, before the flame meteor had even landed on Demon Island, he would have already won against Yi Fan. As for the European black sorcerers, he did not even care about them. He could just send out a few clones to hold them back. By the time they got rid of the clones, he would have already returned to Korea with the flame meteor. Rumble, just as everyone was having their own thoughts, a huge roar suddenly came from the sky. The roar came from afar, and it was very powerful and shocking. Crash, the countless rocks scattered on the ground of Demon Island shook violently from the huge roar. Crash, all the birds on the island screamed and flew out of the dense forest, fleeing in all directions. Yi Fan turned around and whispered to Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing, who were standing next to him, "The flame meteor is here. Everything will proceed according to the original plan." Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing nodded at Yi Fan as a response. Just as Yi Fan finished speaking, there was a sudden change in the sky. The sky that was covered with dark clouds a moment ago suddenly turned fiery red. It was a spectacular sight. The dark clouds in the sky were illuminated by the fiery light, and they kept churning, as if countless flames were burning fiercely. Samantha! Wakula, when the beautiful witch saw this, she immediately chanted a spell and waved the broom in her hand, drawing in the air above her head. Buzz, wherever the broom passed, a dazzling white light appeared out of thin air. Mata, Bonnie. The witch kept chanting as she spun on the spot, using the broom in her hand as a pen, and kept waving it. In the blink of an eye, a huge 6-pointed star pattern appeared above the witch's head. The six-pointed star was about 9 feet in size, and it was dazzling and dazzling. It was very beautiful. Bawuda! Nanala, after the witch's six-pointed star pattern floated above her head, the male sorcerer chanted a spell and pointed at the huge star pattern above his head, drawing in the air continuously. Buzz. As the male sorcerer drew in the air, the huge six-pointed star pattern suddenly shone brightly, and spiritual energy gathered. Obviously, this pair of European dark sorcerers had been waiting for the flame meteor to appear. Seeing the change in the sky, Kim Yaodong also started to activate the golden spiritual energy in his body. Kim Yaodong's body shone with golden light, and a magnificent light enveloped him. It could be seen that he had not used his full strength when he used the 1,000-people technique last night. The reason was simple. When he used the 1,000-people technique last night, Kim Yaodong's body emitted a pure white light, but now the light he emitted was golden. The strength of his spiritual pressure was more than 10 times that of last night. He was preparing for the 1,000-people technique. Kamehameha saw through Kim Yaodong's intention. The silver-haired, black-robed Yi Fan raised his head and looked at the sea of fiery clouds in the sky, and said calmly, "It's my turn now." After hearing this, Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing looked at each other, and then tacitly retreated 3 feet away. They were well aware of how high Yi Fan's cultivation was and how strong his spiritual energy was. At this time, he had to use his full strength to stop the huge fiery meteor from falling from the sky. In this way, the two of them had to distance themselves from Yi Fan to avoid being affected by Yi Fan's spiritual energy. Yi Fan slowly closed his eyes and started to activate the third stage of the mysterious sky secret essentials, Phoenix Dance of the Ninth Heaven, and the demonic power he had obtained from the demon realm. As the two spiritual energies surged out of Yi Fan's body, a huge flame instantly shot up into the sky from Yi Fan's body. The flame was hundreds of feet high and was in the shape of a skull. In between the skull's eyebrows, there was a blood-red swastika written upside down, and the bloody light was dazzling. However, it was completely different from before. This time, the huge skull's flame was not red, nor was it black. Instead, it was 7 colors. The combination of the Phoenix Dance of the Ninth Heaven and the demonic power formed this extremely strong spiritual energy flame that was both good and evil, immortal and demonic. Looking at Yi Fan again, he was now surrounded by 7 colors. Red light covered his body, and there were thousands of rays of light and auspicious auras. The two great powers, one good and one evil, had completely merged into one in his body. In between his eyebrows, the red swastika was written upside down like blood, and it was dazzling. In his eyes, 7 colors appeared, and spiritual energy circulated. Whoosh! Yi Fan's silver hair rose into the sky, and the 8-treasure jadeite robe on his body also fluttered without any wind. The scene in front of them stunned all the experts present. The female Magus's beautiful eyes were wide open, and her face was full of disbelief. The male Magus was shocked and could not believe that everything in front of him was real. Although Bamu Chongqing and Kamehameha were already mentally prepared, they were still shocked by Yi Fan's shocking spiritual energy and took a few steps back. Their expressions changed greatly. The strength of Yi Fan's spiritual energy was completely beyond their imagination. It was no wonder that during the demon-slaying conference, Yi Fan could defeat hundreds of experts with one move. With this level of spiritual energy cultivation, not to mention the Yin-Yang 8 disciples, even if a true god descended, they would not be a match for Yi Fan. Chapter 7:18. From Kim Yaodong's point of view, Yi Fan's cultivation was indeed very powerful. But then again, his own spiritual qi cultivation was not to be trifled with either. With his spiritual qi cultivation and his special technique, his overall combat strength should not be below Yi Fan's. But when he saw the violent spiritual qi Yi Fan was releasing, Kim Yaodong was completely stunned. He did not use his full strength last night, but this young man did the same. Judging from his current level of spiritual qi cultivation, it would be a piece of cake for him to completely freeze the ice dome with his cold qi. The reason he did that last night was firstly to preserve his strength, and secondly, to probe his moves. In an instant, Kim Yaodong understood everything. This young man was indeed powerful. Not only was his cultivation heaven-defying, but he was also resourceful. Kim Yaodong was not angry at Yi Fan's arrangements and methods. The reason was very simple. Protecting Demon Island was the common responsibility of all the experts present, including himself. Moreover, he had previously promised Yi Fan that he would check for any flaws and help. Yi Fan had not done anything wrong in this regard. The fault did not lie with the other party, but with himself. He had greatly underestimated Yi Fan's true strength. Today, it was still unknown who would get the fire meteor. Kim Yaodong thought to himself as he looked at Yi Fan's 7-colored spiritual qi flames soaring into the sky. Within the 7-colored skeleton flames, Yi Fan, who had already entered the state of the demon monarch, had his hands behind his back. He raised his head and looked at the rolling fire clouds in the sky. His expression was as calm as Mount Tai. At this moment, he was like a completely different person compared to before he used his spiritual qi. He was like a monarch overlooking the world. Confidence came from strength. The perfect fusion of the two great powers made Yi Fan feel an unprecedented power. The Persian man looked at Yi Fan in shock, as if he was in a dream. What he was shocked about was not how strong Yi Fan's phoenix dances in the 9th heaven was, nor how domineering his heavenly demon power was. What he was shocked about was that Yi Fan was actually able to merge these two powers that were like fire and water, and use them for himself. Since ancient times, he had heard of people who had entered the demonic path and cultivated the demonic path. He had also heard of people who had transcended the heavenly tribulation and had spiritual qi like an immortal. However, he had never heard of anyone who could do both at the same time. And now, he was witnessing this shocking scene with his own eyes. The pure, domineering, and powerful 7-colored spiritual qi of heaven and earth, as well as the heavenly demon power that was comparable to the power of immortals, were all concentrated in this young man's body. There was no conflict of any kind. This young man called Yi Fan could be said to be the first person in history to do so. Just as the Persian man was shocked by Yi Fan's peerless cultivation, the strange phenomenon in the sky changed again. Who the fire was of the skies of the world's vision. Boom! The loud of the loud of the fire of the world 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 of the world. Boom! As the fire clouds gradually swelled, a huge fireball broke through the thick layer of fire clouds and came crashing down from the sky. The fireball was more than 10 feet in size and was surrounded by raging flames. The falling speed of the fire meteor was so fast that it formed a semicircular light shield in front of it. At the end of the meteor, there was a dazzling fiery tail that was more than 10 feet in length. Fire meteor! Seeing this shocking phenomenon, all the experts exclaimed in their hearts at the same time. Seeing that the fire meteor had appeared, the two European dark sorcerers activated the huge hexagram array suspended above their heads at the same time. Buzz, the hexagram array shone brightly, and its spiritual energy increased greatly. In an instant it expanded to 7 feet in size. Technique of 1,000 people. Kim Yaodong shouted and began to activate the golden humanoid spiritual energy in his body. He used the secret technique that made him famous. Technique of 1,000 people. Swish, swish, swish. As soon as Kim Yaodong finished speaking, countless human figures shot out from the golden radiance on Kim Yaodong's body. The golden radiance flashed and the human figures were everywhere. Thousands of doppelgangers instantly turned into real bodies and floated around Kim Yaodong. The scene was extremely shocking. These thousands of doppelgangers were all covered with a layer of faint golden radiance. The strength of their spiritual energy was more than 10 times stronger than the previous night. Kim Yaodong, who was standing on the island, fixed his eyes on the huge fire meteor that was whizzing down from the clouds. His eyes were like torches. He was waiting for the fire meteor to fall to a height of 1,000 feet. Then, he would mobilize all his doppelgangers to resist the impact of the fire meteor and obtain it. However, he was wrong. Just as he was concentrating on the falling fire meteor, Yi Fan made his move. Ting! Yi Fan, who was burning with flames, tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and used a peerless movement skill. In an instant, he turned into a dazzling star and soared into the sky like a 7-colored meteor. Bang! 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 Yi Fan's speed was so fast that 3 halos of air current appeared around him. The 2 dark magi were stunned. At this moment, the fire meteor was still 100,000 feet away from Demon Island, but Yi Fan had already made his move. Kim Yaodong, who had been full of confidence, was also dumbfounded. He was prepared to catch the fire meteor at a distance of 1,000 feet, while Yi Fan was going to catch it at a height of 100,000 feet. When the two were compared, it was obvious who had the upper hand. Kim Yaodong's face turned pale, and his eyes were filled with shock. He raised his head and looked at Yi Fan, who had turned into a 7-colored star and was flying at high speed. With a thought, he activated the spiritual energy in his body and used his movement skill to rise from the ground. Shua Kim Yaodong, who was covered in golden radiance, turned into a ball of golden radiance and chased after Yi Fan, leaving behind a trail of golden radiance. Shua shua shua, at the same time that Kim Yaodong rose into the air, the thousands of doppelgangers that were suspended in mid-air instantly returned to their original bodies. He had to recall his doppelgangers and concentrate his spiritual energy to activate his movement skill. Only then could he increase his speed to the maximum. The moment Kim Yaodong rose into the air, the 2 dark magi also made their move. The 2 of them leaped into the air and landed on the gigantic 6-pointed star array that was hovering above their heads and glowing with white light. Shua! The brilliant 6-pointed star array rose rapidly and carried the 2 dark magi up into the air at high speed. The speed of the 6-pointed star array was extremely fast, and the trail of white light was 9 feet long. In the blink of an eye, the 4 experts flew up at the same time, not giving way to each other. In the sky, 3 rays of light shot up into the clouds, and it was a beautiful sight. Yi Fan, who had transformed into the Devil Monarch, was in the middle of the resplendent 7-colored star array. Kim Yaodong, who was in the middle of the golden radiance, was using all his strength to activate his movement skill. Following behind Kim Yaodong was the pair of European dark magi who were standing on the 6-pointed star array. Among the 3 forces, the one with the fastest speed was Yi Fan. With the help of the heavenly demonic force and phoenix dances of the 9th heaven, Yi Fan's speed could be imagined. Kim Yaodong's golden spiritual energy was not weak, but compared to Yi Fan's, the difference was like heaven and earth. The distance between him and Yi Fan was increasing, and in the blink of an eye, it was already more than 10,000 feet. However, the 6-pointed star array of the dark magi was a little surprising. The dazzling 6-pointed astral array rose faster and faster, catching up to Jin Yaodong and gradually reaching the same height. Kim Yaodong frowned and looked at the 2 dark magi. The speed of these 2 people was so fast that he was a little surprised. The beautiful female magi turned her head and smiled at Kim Yaodong. Then, she used the broom in her hand to hit the 6-pointed star array below her feet. Whoosh! The brilliance of the 6-pointed star array burst forth, and its speed increased again, quickly overtaking Kim Yaodong. Kim Yaodong's expression gradually turned serious. The 6-pointed star array of the dark magi was indeed powerful, to be able to reach such a speed. He had really underestimated them. It seemed like everyone was the same, hiding their true strength. Kim Yaodong thought to himself. However, although he was at a disadvantage, he was not flustered. The reason was simple. He had not pushed his spiritual energy to the maximum. Movement techniques were one thing, and strength was another. Rushing to the front of the fiery meteor was only the first step. The most important thing was to use strength to cushion the impact of the fiery meteor. At this moment, he was well aware that even if he used all his spiritual energy to push his movement techniques, he would not be able to overtake Yi Fan. Yi Fan's spiritual energy was too powerful. Rather than using all his strength to push his movement techniques, it was better to conserve most of his spiritual energy and wait for the next opportunity. He was well aware of how powerful the fiery meteor was. This fiery meteor full of energy was enough to trigger a huge tsunami and destroy a medium-sized town. What he was waiting for was for Yi Fan to be unable to withstand the impact of the fiery meteor. If Yi Fan was unable to withstand this force, then there was no need to talk about the European Magi. In this way, not only would the two forces not be able to obtain the fiery meteor, but they would also be able to cushion the impact of the fiery meteor. At that time, he would use the technique of 1,000 people and use all his spiritual energy to withstand the fiery meteor. While the three forces were displaying their abilities, Bamu Chongqing and Kamehameha were also stunned by the scene in front of them. They did not expect that the three forces would fly into the sky and fight for the fiery meteor. The development of the situation was far beyond their expectations. The originally agreed-upon plan was suddenly disrupted. The two of them wanted to help, but because of their own cultivation techniques, they could not fly into the clouds. In terms of combat power, the two of them were top-notch masters, but in terms of flying techniques, the two of them could not compare with the four people in the sky. The two of them could fly in the air, but they could only fly in midair. This made the two of them very anxious. They had combat power, but they could not help. If the two of you want to catch up with them, I can help. After seeing the anxious look on the two's faces, the Persian man, who had been standing next to them and had not spoken, spoke to the two of them. Kamehameha turned his head and asked anxiously, "Mr. Suddy, can you help?" The Persian man did not answer Kamehameha. Instead, he took off the flying carpet on his back and threw it into the sky. Whoosh! The huge and exquisite flying carpet quickly unfolded in mid-air and floated motionlessly. "There's no time to lose. Hurry up." The Persian man looked at the two of them and said, "I'll give you a ride." When Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing heard what the Persian man said, they were immediately overjoyed. The two of them looked at each other, turned their heads, and nodded at the Persian man. Then, they used their movement techniques and moved. Whoosh! The two of them instantly disappeared. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, the two of them appeared on the flying carpet out of thin air. "Rise!" The Persian man shouted and flipped his hand. Whoosh! Chapter 719. Whoosh! The speed of the flying carpet was extremely fast. It went against the heavens, and the airflow it brought along was loud. Before Kim Yaodong, who was wrapped in golden light, could react, the Persian flying carpet whizzed past him. The Persian had also made his move. Looking at the huge flying carpet that was moving at high speed, Kim Yaodong frowned. Obviously, the Persian was on Yi Fan's side. The people standing on the flying carpet were none other than the leader of Japan's Koga-Ryu clan, Bamu Chongqing, and the Grandmaster of Special Abilities, Kamehameha. This was going to be lively. Everyone had already joined in the fight for the flaming meteor. On the huge and beautiful flying carpet, Kamehameha, who was in a gray robe, and Bamu Chongqing, who was in a white robe, were expressionless as they stared at the pair of European dark warlocks who were less than 1,000 feet away from them. In order to protect Yi Fan from being harassed by others, they had to be at the same height as the pair of European dark warlocks. This was the only way to ensure that Yi Fan could focus on capturing the flaming meteor. However, they were no longer worried about this problem. The reason was simple. The speed of the huge Persian flying carpet under their feet was much faster than the hexagram array of the European dark warlocks. Whoosh! As the Persian flying carpet rose rapidly, the distance between the two parties became shorter and shorter. After a while, the distance between the two parties was equal, and they were at the same height. The two dark warlocks on the hexagram array turned their heads and looked at the two people on the Persian flying carpet in shock. Obviously, the two of them didn't expect the Persian flying carpet to be under the feet of Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing. They also didn't expect the Persian flying carpet to be so fast that it could catch up with the dark warlocks. The two of them turned their heads and chanted an incantation. Once again, they slammed the broom on the dazzling hexagram array under their feet. Buzz! The hexagram array glowed with white light again, and its speed increased rapidly. They wanted to shake off the flying carpet's tail. However, this move didn't work. No matter how hard the two of them tried to activate the six-pointed astral formation, the Persian carpet seemed to have a mind of its own. It followed the six-pointed astral formation closely. As the six-pointed astral array sped up, so did the flying carpet. As the six-pointed astral array sped up, so did the flying carpet. All in all, the flying carpet was always at the same height as the six-pointed star array. It was neither overtaking it nor falling behind it. The tall and handsome wizard was infuriated by this scene. While standing on the six-pointed star array, he swept the dark brown broom horizontally at the Persian flying carpet that was 100 feet away from him. Then, he suddenly swept it across the air. Whoosh! A black arc of light shot out, heading straight for the flying carpet. The black arc of light was 3 zhang in size and was as black as ink. Black smoke rose from it. His opponent had begun to make his move. This time, he could go all out. Yagi Zhangqing, who was on the flying carpet, thought to himself. He stretched out his hand, and unsheathed the white saber from his waist with a schwa sound. The saber was as bright as frost and snow, as white as jade. After Bamu Chongqing pulled out his saber from its scabbard, his saber momentum did not change as he swung his saber. Whoosh! The saber broke through the air, and a curtain of sabers poured down. Along with the sharp sound of the saber breaking through the air, a huge saber arc of light that was 5 zhang long was released from the saber in Bamu Chongqing's hand. It rushed toward the high-speed black arc of light. The horizontal distance between the two parties was not far, and they were at the same height. In addition, the speed of the light arcs released by the two parties was extremely fast. Therefore, the moment the two parties made their moves, they instantly met in the air. Boom! After a loud noise, the white light splashed, and the black light shattered. The sound waves vibrated, and the air waves dispersed. The two big moves cancelled each other out in the air, turning into countless black and white light fragments that fell down. The huge flying carpet and the dazzling six-pointed star array were instantly separated by the airwaves, and the distance between them was as much as 300 feet. The beautiful female wizard seemed to be a little angry at the wizard's move. She turned her head and glared at the wizard, then turned back to look at Bamu Chongqing. Her beautiful eyes frowned slightly. Bamu Chongqing held his saber with one hand and looked at the female wizard with an expressionless face. This time, the other party had made the first move. An eye for an eye, and he was not in the wrong. However, at this moment, the wizard on the six-pointed star array suddenly raised the broom in his hand and aimed it at the two people on the flying carpet. Whoosh! A huge black pillar of smoke poured out from the broom in his hand and headed straight for the two. The black pillar of smoke was several feet thick, and the black smoke billowed and covered the sky. Wung wung wung! Within the pillar of smoke, there were countless buzzing sounds that made one's scalp go numb. When he saw the scene in front of him, Kamehameha's expression changed drastically. This was not black smoke, but countless flies that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. The buzzing sound they heard was the sound of countless flies flapping their wings. "It's the Black Death flies." On the flying carpet, Kamehameha exclaimed to Bamu Chongqing, "These flies have the Black Death plague on them. Don't let them touch you." The knowledgeable Kamehameha had long heard of the abilities of the European dark magi. It was said that they could summon some evil and poisonous creatures for their use at any time. Some of the more powerful dark magi could even infect an entire city with a deadly plague with just a fly or a bug, slaughtering hundreds of thousands of people in a single night. The flies in front of them had dark green heads and black smoke emitted from their wings. One look and one could tell that they were the deadly plague flies. After hearing Kamehameha's warning, Bamu Chongqing immediately urged his spiritual energy to form a protective barrier around himself, completely enveloping himself and Kamehameha. 1. The barrier was 3 feet in size, pure white in color, and flashed with brilliance. The moment the barrier was set up, the flies that filled the sky rushed onto it. In the blink of an eye, the white barrier that Bamu Chongqing had set up was densely packed with poisonous flies, turning into a huge black ball of flies. It was a ghastly sight. Seeing this, a cold smile appeared on the male Magus' face. A Japanese grandmaster, a grandmaster of the spell world, was nothing more than this. In front of tens of thousands of black death flies, even the strongest expert would have to retreat. Smack! Just as the adept was feeling smug, the witch swung her hand and slapped his handsome face. They were here to look for Huolyoshing, not to start a feud. Offending the Japanese Kaguryu and the elders of the Japanese spell world would not do them any good. This was secondary. The female Magus was not most worried about the 3 of them, but the person behind the scenes. To be able to mobilize 3 experts with such high cultivation, the power and influence of the person behind the scenes was unimaginable. Offending such a person would not end well for them. The male Magus' head tilted to the side from the sudden slap, and he saw stars. "You!" The male Magus was a little angry and glared at the female Magus. The female Magus stared coldly at the male Magus, her gaze as sharp as a knife. Being stared at by the female Magus, the anger in the male Magus' eyes was extinguished, and his gaze became timid. It was obvious that the female Magus' prestige and cultivation far surpassed the male Magus. Buzz, just as the 2 of them were staring at each other, the black fly ball on the Persian carpet began to change. Countless rays of dazzling white light shot out from Yagi Long Kiyoshi's protective light sphere. Chi, chi. The countless poisonous flies attached to the light ball instantly shattered under the blinding white rays, turning into black smoke and disappearing with the wind. The male Magus' expression changed. Bamu Chongqing had deliberately retreated just now to attract the poisonous flies. When all the poisonous flies had gathered, he would gather and destroy them. His guess was not wrong. Bamu Chongqing had used this move. Coincidentally, he had learned this move from Yi Fan when he was dealing with the murderous poisonous crab. He had learned and applied it on the spot. At the beginning, he had indeed condensed a spiritual energy light ball, but when all the poisonous flies had gathered, he immediately activated the spiritual energy in the light ball into sword energy. In terms of spiritual energy, Bamu Chongqing might not be the most outstanding one among these people, but in terms of sword energy, no one here could surpass him, including Kamehameha. Kamehameha's sword energy was powerful, and he was known as the Broken Swordsman. However, he was not the only one who could break swords. Bamu Chongqing could also do it. Kamehameha was well aware of this. In Dongying there were many ninja sections. There were no less than 10 ninja sects of various sizes, and each had their own strengths and specialties. It could be said that there were hundreds of flowers blooming, and there were many experts. However, although each sect had their own specialties, there was one basic skill that all ninja sects valued the most, and that was sword technique. A ninja who was not good at sword techniques was not a qualified ninja. and the highest level of sword techniques was naturally sword energy. Among all the ninja sects, if the Koga-ryu claimed to be second in terms of sword techniques, no one would dare to claim to be first. One had to know that in the Koga-ryu, the experts who cultivated sword energy accounted for 1/3 of the disciples. Bamu Chongqing was the sect leader of the Koga-ryu, so one could imagine how high his sword energy cultivation was. It was said that in the Sakura garden in the backyard of the Koga-ryu, there was a black and shiny rockery named Sword Mound. The rockery was more than 7 feet tall, more than 4 feet wide, and weighed hundreds of thousands of kilograms. This rockery was so heavy because the material of this rockery was neither soil nor mud, neither wood nor stone. The things that made up this rockery were countless swords made of steel. There was a rule in the Koga-ryu. As long as a new disciple joined the sect leader would personally give the new disciple a sword made of steel as a gift during the apprenticeship ceremony. The new disciple would use this sword to complete all the cultivation in the sect. In the process of cultivation, it was inevitable that there would be battles and killings. If a disciple died in a battle outside, the other disciples would send someone to retrieve the saber of the dead disciple and place it in the back garden to mourn the dead and to inspire the living to fight. If a disciple was successful in his studies and was prepared to venture into the Jianghu alone, the sword that he wore when he joined the sect would also be placed in the sword mound to show his loyalty to the sect. He was born a member of the Koga-ryu and died a Koga-ryu soul, just like this sword. For hundreds of years, the reputation of the Koga-ryu grew, and the number of disciples increased. Naturally, the sword mound in the backyard became more and more spectacular. It was not only the disciples who were related to the sword mound. The sect leader of the Koga-ryu also had a very close relationship with it. Chapter 720. Only by splitting this mountain made up of countless steel swords in half with his bare hands could he be qualified to become the suzerain of the Koga-ryu. However, it was extremely difficult to achieve this. The reason was very simple. As time passed, there were more and more swords on the mound, and after hundreds of years of wind and rain, this mountain of swords had gradually formed into a black iron mountain. It was easier said than done to split open the mound with his bare hands. In the history of the Koga-ryu, there were several periods when the sect was in a state of being without a leader. At that time, the affairs of the entire sect were completely handled by several senior disciples at the level of protector. The reason for this situation was not because of anything else, but because no one in the sect at that time could split open the mound with his bare hands, so no one was qualified to inherit the position of the suzerain of the Koga-ryu. The strict rules of the Koga-ryu were obvious. However, because of this, the successive suzerains of the Koga-ryu were all top masters with extremely high levels of swordsmanship, and the Koga-ryu had always been ranked first in the Japanese ninja world. Among the successive suzerains of the Koga-ryu, most of them could only reach the supreme level of breaking the mound with their bare hands when they were in their 40s. Occasionally, there were a few suzerains with higher qualifications who could reach this level in their 30s, but they were extremely rare. And Bamu Chongqing, a thin boy who was only 15 years old when he entered the sect, actually became the youngest suzerain in the history of the Koga-ryu from a low-level disciple who couldn't even hold a sword steadily in 3 years. In other words, Bamu Chongqing could split the mound in half with his bare hands when he was 18 years old. At that time, this incident not only shocked everyone in the Koga-ryu, but even the Emperor of Japan at that time was alarmed. Bamu Chongqing's swordsmanship could reach such a level when he was 18 years old. Now that he was 30 years old, he was at his peak, so one could imagine how high his swordsmanship was. After exterminating all of the plague flies that the adept had released with his sword aura, Yagi Zhongqing held his sword with one hand and stared at the adept in the hexagram array with a pair of cold, piercing eyes. At this moment, the male adept was flabbergasted and speechless. Bamu Chongqing's gaze sent a chill down his spine. When the beautiful witch saw this, she immediately stood in front of the sorcerer and stared at Yagi Long Kiyoshi with her beautiful eyes. This man's blade aura was so powerful that even 10 male adepts would not be able to withstand it. If he uses such despicable tricks again, I will take his life. Bamu Chongqing looked calmly at the witch and said coldly. Screech! Yagi Long Kiyoshi sheathed his katana as he spoke. He had already heard the sound of the witch slapping the male adept's face from within the protective sphere. It was obvious that the witch didn't want to have anything to do with them. The one who had acted rashly was the male witch. It was for this reason that he sheathed his saber. When the witch heard this, she turned to look at the wizard and whispered a few words in English. After hearing this, the sorcerer lowered his head in shame. Just like that, the battle between the two sides came to an end. In the airspace below them, the smile on Kim Yaodong's face gradually disappeared. When the two sides were fighting above him, he had seen it with his eyes and was delighted. As the saying went, when the sandpiper and the clam fight, the fisherman benefits. Both sides fighting was only beneficial to him. Both sides were top-notch experts. Once they fought, the situation would naturally become more and more intense. If they didn't die, they would be injured. That way, he would be able to get rid of the dissidents without having to do anything. However, what he did not expect was that after a brief exchange of blows, both sides stopped fighting. It was obvious that both sides were very cautious and did not want to get involved too much. After all, both sides' cultivation and status were at the top level. No matter which side they offended, it would not be a good thing. Bamu Chongqing was the leader of the Kaga sect and had thousands of disciples. Kamehameha was a senior figure in the Japanese martial arts world and was highly respected. The witch did not want to provoke them at all. Then again, the European black sorcerers were not to be trifled with. If they were offended, they could just go to Japan and release a plague, which would be enough to give the emperor a headache. Both sides were smart people, so they did not overdo it. Within the golden light, Kim Yaodong whispered, "Cunning fellows." Whoosh! High up in the sky, Yi Fan, who was in the flames of the rainbow skull, held a huge tail light and pierced the clouds. At this time, he had no time to care about the battle below. It was no longer something he cared about. There was only one thing he wanted to do now, and that was to stop the fire meteor from falling and get this piece of meteoric iron. Boom! The huge fire meteor wrapped in flames let out an earth-shattering roar and whistled down. Whoosh! Yi Fan, whose eyes were like torches, fiercely urged his spiritual energy and activated the spiritual energy of the Phoenix Dance's ninth heaven and the power of the heavenly demon to 70%. Wung! The flames of the rainbow skull soared again, and the huge flames it emitted were no less imposing than the fire meteor. Wung! The inverted swastika between Yi Fan's eyebrows shone with a bright red light, and a light burst out. One was a meteor falling from the sky, evil meteoric iron, surrounded by raging flames and glowing red. The other was a heavenly tribulation body, the monarch of the demon realm, surrounded by spiritual energy and glowing with 7 colors. The two flames were getting closer and closer, and the distance between them was less than 1,000 feet. At this time, Yi Fan could already feel the soaring murderous aura and frightening high temperature emitted by the fire meteor. For him, who was born in a family of weaponsmiths, the moment he saw the fire meteor, he knew how high its temperature was. In the eyes of ordinary people, the red flames surrounding the fire meteor were the hottest. In fact, this was a misconception. The flames surrounding the fire meteor were indeed very hot, but it was not the hottest part of the fire meteor. The hottest part of the fire meteor was the cyan light shield in front of it. This was the so-called perfection, and Yi Fan, who had seen many weaponsmiths, knew this principle very well. When the temperature of the fire reached its peak, the flames would not be orange, but a translucent cyan. This fire meteor had come from hundreds of thousands of feet away, and the cyan light shield in front of it was extremely hot. It was not something an ordinary person could imagine. If a treasured sword made of fine steel was thrown at the fire meteor, it would be melted by the high temperature in an instant, turning into liquid iron and cyan smoke before it could even touch the fire meteor. However, Yi Fan was already prepared for this problem. When Yi Fan felt the blazing heat of the meteor, he thought of something and began to circulate the ice core in his body. Under the activation of the spiritual energy, the ice core floating in Yi Fan's chi suddenly shone with a silver light. A dazzling beam of light shot out from the ice core, surging up Yi Fan's meridians and swimming to Yi Fan's palms at high speed. With the rapid condensation of the cold energy, Yi Fan's palms suddenly shone with a dazzling white light, and the cold energy spread everywhere. In the blink of an eye, Yi Fan's arms had become 2 arms of light, shining brightly and emitting cold energy. However, this time, Yi Fan did not release the cold energy. Instead, he gathered the cold energy in his arms and did not release it. He wanted to use his arms to touch the fire meteor directly to stop the impact of the fire meteor. The condensation of the cold energy was only to protect his arms. The speed of both parties was extremely fast, and the distance of a few hundred feet was covered in the blink of an eye. Whoosh! The blazing fire meteor whizzed down. Whoosh! Yi Fan, who was shining with 7 colors, flew up in defiance of the heavens. In the blink of an eye, the 2 powerful forces met in the sky. Boom! Following an earth-shattering explosion, Yi Fan's 7-colored light collided with the flaming meteor that was radiating red light in all directions. Sparks flew everywhere, and the 7 colors danced chaotically. The sound waves exploded, and the airwaves spread everywhere. Clanged after the collision, the sound of metal clashing could be heard. A 7-colored halo of light exploded in waves, and the scene was spectacular. The loud sound caused the blood of the 5 people in the air to churn, and they felt a splitting headache. The 5 of them simultaneously covered their ears with their hands and closed their eyes in pain. Not only that, but the resulting airwaves also shook their bodies violently. The 4 people on the flying carpet and the hexagram array almost fell from above. The male sorcerer even had a nosebleed from the tremors. Kim Yaodong was slightly further away, so he was less affected by the tremors. However, even so, he still felt a tightness in his chest and had difficulty breathing. Then, he looked at Yi Fan. With the help of his swift movement technique, Yi Fan's palms of light instantly shattered the layer of black hard shell that enveloped the fire meteor. Bang! Countless huge fireballs scattered in all directions and rained down like a flaming meteor shower. The moment Yi Fan's palms came into contact with the fire meteor, the cold energy on his palms instantly turned into water vapor. Boom! Yi Fan, who was holding the fire meteor with both hands, instantly started to descend. Yi Fan was no fool. He knew that he could not stop the fire meteor immediately, because that would cause him to suffer the greatest impact. The best way was to gradually reduce the force of the fire meteor's impact, and then slowly exert more force. However, what Yi Fan did not expect was that the impact of the fire meteor was too great. The moment he came into contact with the fire meteor, his body started to descend rapidly. Seeing this, Yi Fan was greatly shocked. He had used nearly 70% of the strength of the 2 ultimate techniques, and yet he was still descending so quickly. What was even more inconceivable was that the cold energy he had gathered was being depleted at a speed far beyond his expectations. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the cold energy he had gathered had been consumed. He had greatly underestimated the impact and heat of the fire meteor. Seeing Yi Fan descend at high speed, Kim Yaodong, who was protected by the golden light, smiled. Yi Fan was ultimately unable to stop the fire meteor's descent. This time, victory was in his grasp. As long as Yi Fan was exhausted, he would be able to take advantage of the situation. Kim Yaodong thought to himself as he dodged the fireballs raining down from the sky. However, he had underestimated Yi Fan too much. Yi Fan's strength was far beyond this. Chapter 721. However, Yi Fan didn't need to use these two powers at the moment, because he still had 30% of his strength that he hadn't used yet. Amidst the 7 colored flames, he saw that 70% of his strength wasn't enough, so he immediately increased his 2 spiritual powers to 90%. This was the first time he had used 90% of his strength since he obtained the 2 spiritual powers. 1. As Yi Fan rapidly increased his strength, the 7 colored flames enveloping his body suddenly increased by 3 times, like a giant mountain peak of flames. Roar! The giant's skull instantly became ferocious, and it opened its mouth to roar, its voice reaching the heavens. At the same time, a drop of crimson blood slowly seeped out from between Yi Fan's eyebrows and gradually flowed onto the entire inverted swastika. 1. When the blood completely filled the inverted swastika, 10,000 rays of crimson light shot out from the swastika, dazzling the eyes. The demonic blood had appeared. The true power of the demonic power had begun to awaken. Whoosh! Yi Fan's silver hair instantly turned crimson, fluttering in the wind. The 7 colored flames enveloped Yi Fan, and 10,000 rays of crimson light wrapped around his body. The 2 powers that Yi Fan was currently releasing were close to their peak state. At this moment, Yi Fan's face had begun to become somewhat ferocious, and there was a strange, evil smile on his face. Several red rays of light began to shuttle back and forth in his dazzling 7-colored eyes, and coupled with his long hair that fluttered in the wind, he looked like a demon god that had descended to the mortal realm. The true body of the demon king had appeared. Heh heh heh! Yi Fan, who was holding the flaming meteor in his hand, lowered his head and let out a creepy cackle. Yi Fan's weird cackle caused all the experts below to feel a chill in their hearts. A chill that seeped into their bones. This chill traveled from their tailbones all the way up their backs, all the way to the back of their heads. The beautiful witch slammed the broom in her hand, and instantly stopped the dazzling white hexagram array beneath her feet. She hovered motionlessly. She raised her head to look at Yi Fan, whose spiritual energy had gone berserk, and frowned, her expression solemn. The male witch with the nosebleed glanced at the witch, but didn't speak. This time, he had learned his lesson and understood that there was always someone better than him. Even the witches didn't dare to approach him. It was obvious how powerful the red-haired boy was. As soon as the hexagram array stopped, the flying carpet that had been maintained at the same height also stopped. Bamu Chongqing and Kamehameha looked at Yi Fan in the sky at the same time. Their faces were pale, and they did not say a word. At this moment they finally understood what true strength was. Compared to Yi Fan's power, it would not be an exaggeration to say that their little bit of cultivation was a drop in the ocean. Kim Yaodong, who was continuously charging upwards, also stopped the golden flames at the height of the 4 people. He hovered in the air and looked up. The power that Yi Fan displayed this time made his heart fall to the bottom. Originally, he still held hope in his heart, and he even thought that he would be able to benefit from it. But now it would seem like his thoughts were simply impossibly stupid, and he was as childish as a child. The golden spiritual energy that he had asked for from the gods was indeed very strong, but it couldn't be compared to this young man. With this person's cultivation, he might not even need to use a second move to kill him. He was suddenly very glad that he had made a gentleman's agreement with Yi Fan. Because if it hadn't been for that agreement, he might have chosen to attack Yi Fan before the flame meteor fell. If that had been the case, he would have been throwing an egg at a rock, and seeking his own death. Kim Yaodong thought of this, and a thin layer of cold sweat seeped out of his forehead. Heh 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 heh. Yi Fan's shoulders trembled as his body continued to fall. He laughed strangely, and it was creepy and chilling to hear. It's just a mere flame meteor, what can it do to me? Yi Fan stopped laughing, raised his head with a smile, and said in a low voice. What happened next left all the experts dumbfounded. They saw Yi Fan, who was holding the flame meteor with both hands, slowly withdraw his left hand and put it behind his back. Then, he suddenly exerted force with his right palm. Following Yi Fan's words, 10,000 rays of light burst out from the intersection between Yi Fan's right palm and the flame meteor. The 10,000 rays of light contained 7 colors and were wrapped in a red glow. It was extremely bright, like the sun in the sky. Under the impact of the 10,000 rays of light, the raging flames on the flame meteor were instantly extinguished. What was even more inconceivable was that the moment the raging flames were extinguished, the flame meteor that was pushing Yi Fan down suddenly stopped. The flame meteor was stopped by Yi Fan with only one hand. All the experts' mouths were half open, and they were so shocked that they couldn't say a word. Kim Yaodong used a white handkerchief to wipe his sweat, and his face was pale. The arrogant him had lost his temper at this moment. He had seen experts before, but he had never seen an expert as heaven-defying as Yi Fan. Eldritch was Eldritch after all. It didn't matter if he was reincarnated or not. As long as he made a move, no one could match up to him. Even the 6 immortals were no match for him, let alone an ordinary person like himself. Thinking about his previous arrogance and conceit, Kim Yaodong couldn't help but smile bitterly and shake his head. A mantis trying to stop a chariot, an ant trying to shake a tree. This was none other than himself. Yi Fan, who was holding the flame meteor with one hand, turned around and looked at the experts below. When the experts saw Yi Fan's current appearance, they couldn't help but gasp. At this moment Yi Fan's face was ferocious and full of evil. Red lightning flashed in his eyes, which were full of 7 colors, and he looked extremely frightening. The Demon King really lived up to his name. All the experts were shocked. Great Master Jin, Yi Fan, who was surrounded by an evil aura and had a head full of red hair, looked at Jin Yaodong with a pair of flashing red eyes and said with a smile, "It seems that you'll have to return empty-handed this time." As soon as he said that, the expressions of all the experts, including Kim Yaodong, changed greatly, and their pupils constricted. Yi Fan's voice was actually a mix of male and female voices. On the ground, a tall Sadi, whose head was wrapped in a white headscarf, had a grave expression and a worried frown. Although he didn't fly up, everything that had just happened didn't escape his eyes. Just as this young man had pushed his power to the limit and stopped the flame meteor with one hand, the Yin energy on the flame meteor had already mixed into Yi Fan's spiritual power. And at the same time that Yi Fan withdrew most of his spiritual power, the Yin energy on the flame meteor was also absorbed into Yi Fan's body. After the murderous Yin energy entered his body, it instantly began to affect this young man's mind and aroused the murderous intent of the heavenly demon. That was why this young man had a mix of male and female voices. If it weren't for the fact that he had the pure yang spiritual power of the heavenly tribulation in his body, this young man might have already turned into a bloodthirsty monster. One had to know that the flame meteor itself came from an extremely ominous calamity, and the Yin energy it carried was incomparable to ordinary Yin energy. This was the heavenly demon. Despite all his precautions, this young man's Yin energy had still entered his body. The combination of the heavenly demon's power and the heavenly demon's Yin energy, this young man would have a hard time in the future. Perhaps this was the will of the heavens. Thinking of this, the Persian man closed his eyes and shook his head helplessly. Mr. Ye's cultivation is so high that I've never seen it before. Kim Yaodong heard Yi Fan's question and immediately replied, "I admit defeat and am sincerely convinced." Yi Fan smiled and looked at the 2 dark warlocks. "What about the 2 warlocks? Do you want to fight for it?" Yi Fan, with his flowing red hair, asked the 2 warlocks in a mix of male and female voices. The female warlock didn't understand Chinese, so she looked at the male warlock. The panicked male warlock immediately translated Yi Fan's words to the female warlock. After the female warlock heard this, she said a few words in English to the male warlock. "We're here to take this meteorite, not to fight for it." The male warlock spoke very stiff Chinese and conveyed the female warlock's words to Yi Fan. "The flame meteor belongs to the one with the ability. We're not as skilled as you, so we concede defeat." After hearing this, Yi Fan frowned. Obviously, he was surprised by the female warlock's words. All the signs indicated that the female warlock wasn't lying. In the past few days, they had only wanted to chase the other people on the island away and hadn't really done anything. This could be seen from how the male warlock had attacked and how the female warlock had slapped him. The female warlock nodded at Yi Fan, then turned around and nodded at the other experts. She then activated the hexagram array and slowly turned around, preparing to leave. "Warlocks, please wait." Just as the two warlocks were about to leave, Yi Fan spoke calmly. The male warlock on the hexagram array muttered a few words to the female warlock. The female warlock slowly turned around and looked at Yi Fan with a puzzled expression. Yi Fan, who was holding the flame meteor with one hand, slowly descended and landed in front of the female warlock. Whoosh! During the process of descending, Yi Fan's red hair turned white, and the swastika on his forehead slowly disappeared, returning to its original appearance. The male warlock looked nervous and stood in front of the female warlock. He gripped the broom tightly in his hand and was on full alert. The female warlock pulled the male warlock to the side and looked calmly at Yi Fan, her beautiful eyes calm. If Yi Fan really wanted to kill the two of them, he could do it with a wave of his hand. There was no need for him to go through so much trouble. After stopping in front of the female warlock, Yi Fan stared into the female warlock's eyes and gently placed his left hand on the meteorite in his right hand. *Pa. Yi Fan exerted force with his left hand and clenched his 5 fingers. He forcibly broke off a piece of black meteorite iron from the meteorite and gently placed it in front of the female warlock. The female warlock looked down at the meteorite iron in Yi Fan's hand and then looked up at Yi Fan. Her beautiful eyes frowned slightly. "I admire the warlock's straightforward personality," Yi Fan said. "After all, we have known each other for a while and have even worked together. This piece of meteorite iron is for the warlock as a souvenir." The male warlock translated once again. When the female warlock heard this, she looked up at Yi Fan with her beautiful eyes and took the meteorite iron from Yi Fan. After taking the meteorite iron, the female warlock turned around and whispered a few words to the male warlock. The male warlock was shocked and shook his head. The female warlock whispered a few words to the male warlock. Only then did the male warlock reluctantly take out the glowing crystal ball from his chest. The female warlock took the crystal ball from the male warlock's hand and whispered a few words to the crystal ball with one hand. She then handed it to Yi Fan. It was obvious that this was a gift she was giving to Yi Fan in return. "This is the crystal ball that Mary has been refining for many years. It is her favorite item," the male warlock said to Yi Fan. Yi Fan frowned when he heard this. He didn't know if he should accept it or not. The female warlock grabbed Yi Fan's hand and stuffed the crystal ball into it. Chapter 722. Kamehameha looked at the glowing crystal ball in Yi Fan's hand and said to Yi Fan enviously, "This crystal ball is good stuff. If used properly, you can see things thousands of miles away as if they were right in front of you." "Thousands of miles away? As if they were right in front of you?" Hearing Kamehameha's words, Yi Fan was a little shocked. Kamehameha stroked his beard and nodded with a smile. "Just a small ball is that powerful?" Yi Fan looked at the crystal ball in his hand and muttered to himself. No wonder that sorcerer was so reluctant to part with it. It turned out that this was such a powerful treasure. The crystal ball in the hands of the European dark sorcerers is like a weapon in the hands of an expert. It is something that never leaves their side. Kamehameha smiled at Yi Fan. That which must have taken a liking to you. That's why she gave you such an important treasure. Mr. Kamehameha, please don't speak nonsense. Yi Fan said as he put the crystal ball into his pocket. With this treasure, if used properly, he would be able to see his wife at any time. Everyone, I should also take my leave. Kim Yaodong said to Yi Fan. If the three of you have the chance to go to Korea in the future, you must come to my humble abode as guests. Let me do my best as a host. To be able to make friends with people like them would only be beneficial to him. Especially an expert like Yi Fan who had a heaven-defying cultivation. Don't worry, Sorcerer Jean. Of course. Kamehameha smiled at Kim Yaodong. Bamu Chongqing also smiled and nodded at Kim Yaodong. Sorcerer Jean, you came all the way here. I can't let you go back empty-handed. Yi Fan smiled at Kim Yaodong. I'll also give you a piece of meteoric iron from the fire meteor. Let's count this as an acquaintance. Yi Fan said as he broke off a piece of meteoric iron the size of a fist from the fire meteor and threw it at Kim Yaodong. Kim Yaodong reached out and caught it. I don't have a crystal ball for Mr. Yi, Kim Yaodong said to Yi Fan with a smile while looking at the meteorite in his hand. Yi Fan smiled but did not say anything. It's impolite not to reciprocate. Mr. Yi gave me such a generous gift, so I can't not reciprocate, Kim Yaodong said as he took off the tall hat on his head. This black jade badge was given to me by the King of Korea when I became the chief of the Korean Mage Legion. Today, I'll give this to Mr. Yi as a souvenir. As Kim Yaodong spoke, he reached out and took off the ink-colored badge embedded in his tall hat and tossed it to Yi Fan. Yi Fan reached out and caught it. He held it in his palm and examined it. The badge was less than 2 inches long and was oval in shape. It was made of an extremely rare top-grade black jade. It was warm and simple, full of antiquity. On the black jade, there was a Korean character inlaid with golden threads. It was very beautiful. Mr. Yi, if you pass by Korea, you can use this badge to find me directly at the palace. No one will dare to stop you, Kim Yaodong said to Yi Fan. In that case, it would be impolite of me to decline, Yi Fan said with a smile as he put the black jade badge into his pocket. The green mountains will not change, and the green water will flow forever. See you three again. Kim Yaodong nodded slightly to the three of them. Then, he used his movement technique and flew straight into the sky with golden flames. I really didn't expect this ending. Kamehameha looked at Yi Fan, stroked his long beard, and said with a smile. Turning hostility into friendship, this ending could be said to be a happy ending for everyone. Kamehameha was really surprised. Bufan Koan contributed greatly to the successful completion of this mission, Bamu Chongqing said to Yi Fan. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid that today's battle would have been unavoidable. The three of us carried out this mission together. Of course, we share glory and loss. There's no need to talk about contribution. What do you think, Brother Yagi? Yi Fan said with a smile. Bamu Chongqing smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Yi Fan carried the huge flame meteor and slowly landed on the ground with the two people on the flying carpet. On the ground, a tall Sa-Di looked up at the three of them. There was a slight worry in his eyes. Yi Fan seemed to be fine on the surface, but the heavenly ferocious chi on the flame meteor had begun to invade his mind. It was only temporarily suppressed by his heavenly tribulation spiritual power. Now that the spiritual power balance in his body was close to a critical point, any of his emotions would affect this fragile balance. Mr. Sa-Di contributed greatly to successfully obtaining the meteorite iron this time. This old man thanks Mr. Sa-Di. After landing on the ground, Kamehameha bowed his head and thanked the Persian man. Thank you for your help, Mr. Sa-Di. I am very grateful. Bamu Chongqing bowed to the Persian man and thanked him with his head lowered. It's nothing. It's a piece of cake. A tall Sa-Di waved his hand and said. Thank you, Mr. Sa-di. Yi Fan put the flame meteor on the ground with a bang and said to the Persian man, Mr. Yi, can we talk in private? The Persian man stared at Yi Fan and said with a serious expression. As soon as the Persian man said this, Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing frowned and looked at each other. Yi Fan was also stunned. He didn't know what the Persian man meant. I will wait for Mr. Yi in the cave, the Persian man said as he took back the flying carpet. Then, he slowly turned around and walked into the cave. Please wait for a moment. I will be right back, Yi Fan said to Bamu Chongqing and Kamehameha as he walked into the cave. Bamu Chongqing and Kamehameha nodded. Obviously, the Persian man had something to say to Yi Fan alone. As for what it was, the two of them had no way of knowing. Out of courtesy, the two of them retreated 3 feet away from the cave entrance. When Yi Fan walked into the cave, the Persian man was sitting cross-legged on the ground. He was staring at Yi Fan without blinking. Mr. Sa-di, you are? Yi Fan asked. Sit down. I have something to say to you. The expressionless Persian man interrupted Yi Fan. Yi Fan frowned. He shook his black robe and sat opposite the Persian man. Give me your hand, the Persian man said again. Yi Fan paused for a moment and handed his hand to the Persian man. The Persian man grabbed Yi Fan's hand and pulled up his robe sleeve, revealing his arm. See for yourself, the Persian man said to Yi Fan with raised eyebrows. Yi Fan, who was puzzled, lowered his gaze and looked at his arm. Who would have thought that the moment he saw it, Yi Fan's eyes widened in shock. On his arm, a faint black line could be seen. The black line was extremely thin and faintly discernible. It stretched from his wrist to his entire arm. Yi Fan, who was shocked, hurriedly pulled up his other sleeve. He did the same with his other arm. Don't look, the Persian man said with a frown. The black gas has already spread to your chest. When Yi Fan heard that, he hurriedly pulled open his robe and exposed his chest. When he saw the shocking black lines on his chest, which looked like black blood vessels, Yi Fan was stunned. What is this black gas? Why is it on my body? Yi Fan asked the Persian man in shock. Evil spirit, the Persian man replied. Evil spirit? What evil spirit? Yi Fan asked anxiously. The evil spirit on the fire meteor. It's the evil spirit, the Persian man said as he stared into Yi Fan's eyes. Tian Sha. When Yi Fan heard this, his brows furrowed into a knot. These 2 words didn't sound like anything good. When you came into contact with the fire meteor and released your spiritual power to the extreme, the evil spirit couldn't invade your body. However, when you withdrew most of your spiritual power, the evil spirit mixed with your heavenly demon power and entered your body, the Persian man said. If you didn't have the pure yang spiritual power of the heavenly tribulation protecting you, you would have become a monster by now. However, even so, the evil spirit has already affected your temperament. The balance of your spiritual power has reached a critical point and is very fragile. In other words, whether you will be good or evil in the future will depend entirely on your mind. I see that you are kind and talented, so I kindly reminded you. I hope you will take care of yourself. After hearing what the Persian man said, Yi Fan felt the seriousness of the matter and asked anxiously, Mr. Sa-di, is there any way to get rid of the evil spirit? The Persian man shook his head with a serious expression. The evil spirit is the most overbearing evil spirit. Even if Master is still alive, he may not be able to remove it from your body, the Persian man said with a frown. What if I change my physical body? Yi Fan raised his head and looked at the Persian man. He then asked, Can I remove this murderous aura? I know that the heavenly demon in your body is powerful and can reconstruct your body with a drop of blood. However, this method won't work, the Persian man replied. Why? Yi Fan asked. If the evil spirit had invaded your body, I could remove it now, but that's not the case, the Persian man said with a shake of his head. Mr. Sa-di, you mean? Yi Fan didn't understand what the Persian man meant. The black line was clearly in his body, so why did he say that it hadn't invaded his body? This evil spirit is the same as the heavenly demon power you obtained before. It's completely in your primordial spirit and has nothing to do with your body. The Persian man explained to Yi Fan, you can reconstruct your body, but can you reconstruct your primordial spirit? Yi Fan was silent. The Persian man was right. His heavenly demon power was indeed in his primordial spirit and had nothing to do with his body. It was easy to reconstruct his body, but he didn't have the ability to reconstruct his primordial spirit. The primordial spirit was the soul. It could only be reincarnated and couldn't be reconstructed. Is there really no other way? Yi Fan asked the Persian man as he couldn't come up with a solution. It's not that there isn't a way, but… The Persian man looked at Yi Fan and stopped talking. But what? Mr. Sa-di? Yi Fan hurriedly asked. The Persian man's words made Yi Fan feel like he saw a glimmer of hope. This method is too dangerous, the Persian man said hesitantly. If you don't handle it well, it'll backfire and you'll lose your life. Mr. Sa-di, please feel free to speak, Yi Fan said to the Persian man. To be honest, I'm used to danger. Chapter 723. Half an hour later, the silver-haired, black-robed Yi Fan slowly walked out of the cave. His expression was calm and he had a smile on his face. Bamu Chongqing and Kamehameha, who were waiting outside, saw Yi Fan come out of the cave and immediately approached him. Are you okay? Bamu Chongqing asked Yi Fan worriedly. I'm fine, Yi Fan replied with a smile. That's good, that's good. Kamehameha stroked his long beard and said with a smile. The two people had been in the cave for half an hour, which made them a little worried. They were not worried that the Persian man would harm Yi Fan, but they were worried that something would happen to Yi Fan. The Persian man had said to Yi Fan in front of them that Yi Fan's cultivation seemed to be heaven-defying, but his actual situation was very dangerous. However, when they saw Yi Fan's calm expression when he came out of the cave, the two of them felt relieved. The two of you should return to the East Sea now, Yi Fan said to Kamehameha and Bamu Chongqing with a smile. I will take the meteorite back. Okay, we will immediately return to the East Sea, Bamu Chongqing said. It is not good to stay here for a long time, lest something unexpected happens. What about Mr. Sa-di? Should we say goodbye to him? Kamehameha suddenly remembered that the Persian man was still in the cave and had not come out. He is now casting spells in the cave, preparing to catch the monkey. We have to go in and disturb him, Yi Fan said to Kamehameha. When we came out of the cave, I already said goodbye to him on behalf of the two of you. Kamehameha slowly nodded. The two of you, we will see each other in the East Sea, Yi Fan said as he reached out and waved his sleeve at the huge meteorite iron robe standing on the ground. The huge, shiny black meteorite began to slowly leave the ground and rise into the air. It was a spectacular sight. Then I'll leave first, Bamu Chongqing patted Yi Fan on the shoulder and said, I'll find you for a drink when I get back. Yi Fan smiled and nodded. Let's go. As Bamu Chongqing spoke, his figure instantly rose from the ground and leaped towards the surface of the sea, breaking through the waves 7 feet away from the surface of the sea. Mr. Yi, I'll see you in the East China Sea, Kamehameha said as he gently waved the saber in his hand. Whoosh, the jade-breaking saber flashed with gray light, and instantly turned back into the original brown wooden staff. Kamehameha tossed the wooden staff into the air, and then his toes touched the ground, and he soared into the air, standing firmly on top of the wooden staff. Whoosh, the wooden staff slowly turned around in the air and flew towards the East Sea at high speed. As soon as the two of them left, the smile on Yi Fan's face instantly disappeared. He turned around and faced the stone cave. Mr. Sa-di, I'm leaving. Take care, Yi Fan said to the cave. Go, we'll meet again if fate wills it. The Persian man's voice came from the stone cave. After Yi Fan bowed 3 times towards the stone cave, he silently recited the cloud's soaring immortal art. Clouds suddenly rose under Yi Fan's feet, and Yi Fan's figure slowly rose into the sky. After rising to a height of 10,000 feet, Yi Fan pushed the clouds aside and flew towards the East China Sea at high speed. The huge meteorite obediently followed behind Yi Fan's auspicious clouds, floating forward. Compared to when he came, Yi Fan returned to the East China Sea at a much faster speed. It had been 5 days since he came to Demon Island, and he had already obtained the meteorite. He was thinking about Baihu Xiao Zhao Akatsuki and his beloved wife in Pear Blossom Palace, Fujiwara no Chiko. He pushed the auspicious clouds under his feet to the extreme, and they fluttered in the air. The auspicious clouds were as fast as lightning, and in less than half an incense's time, they arrived above the East China Sea. At this time, Matsumoto Takeyoshi, who was wearing a gray robe, was sitting in a warm and comfortable berth, holding an ancient book in his hand, and sipping fragrant tea from time to time. The man in white standing behind Matsumoto Takeyoshi slowly opened his eyes and calmly said, "They are back." So fast? Upon hearing the man in white's words, Matsumoto Takeyoshi's eyes did not leave the book in his hand, and he asked with a smile. The 3 of them came back together. Yi Fan came back on a cloud, and he is now landing on the deck of the battleship. Kamehameha and Bamuchongqing, one is in the air, and the other is on the sea, and they are still 250 kilometers away, the man in white said. Did you get the meteorite? Matsumoto Takeyoshi asked casually as he flipped through the book in his hand, looking absent-minded. Yes, it is with Yi Fan, the man in white replied. It seems that Sea Demon and Kim Yaodong are no match for Yi Fan, Matsumoto Takeyoshi said with a smile as he placed the book in his hand on the table. Yi Fan has already transcended heavenly tribulation. How can the 2 of them be a match for him? The man in white said. I will write a letter in a moment. Send someone to deliver it to the Goryeo king. Tell him that no matter what, I, Matsumoto Takeyoshi, want to thank him, Matsumoto Takeyoshi said. Yes, the man in white replied. What about the sea demon? Is she back? Matsumoto Takeyoshi asked. Not yet, the man in white replied. When she comes back, tell her not to take this matter to heart. She has already done her best, and I will not blame her. Tell her to guard the battleship with peace of mind, Matsumoto Takeyoshi said. Remember, do not let Yi Fan discover her. Understood, the man in white replied. Let's go and take a look at that meteorite. Matsumoto Takeyoshi smiled as he stood up from the futon, stepped on his wooden clogs, and walked towards the cabin door. The man in white followed closely behind him. The 2 of them walked out of the cabin one after the other. High up in the sky, Yi Fan held the huge meteorite with one hand and slowly descended towards the deck of the battleship. On the wide deck, dozens of ninjas looked up at the huge black meteorite in Yi Fan's hand, dumbfounded. Their faces were full of disbelief. Judging from the size of the meteorite in his hand, it weighed at least a few 100,000 pounds, and Yi Fan only used one hand to hold it in his hand. Matsumoto Takeyoshi smiled as he put his hand over his eyes and looked up at the sky. His gray robe was fluttering in the sea breeze. Yi Fan's feet landed on the ground, and he slowly placed the huge meteorite in his hand on the deck. As soon as the meteorite landed, the huge battleship's bow immediately sank a foot, and then it slowly rose up, causing a splash. Fortunately, this battleship had been specially strengthened. Otherwise, with the meteorite weighing over a few 100,000 pounds on its bow, it would have instantly lost its balance and flipped over. Mr. Matsumoto, the fire meteor is here. I can report on my mission. Yi Fan turned to look at Matsumoto Takeyoshi and calmly said, Mr. Yagi and Mr. Kamikaku are still on the way, they should be here soon. Ha ha ha! Matsumoto Takeyoshi laughed as he came to Yi Fan's side. He intimately hugged Yi Fan's shoulder and said with a smile, "Bufan, Kuan has done a great job this time. I will hold a banquet to welcome the three of you and reward you heavily. I will let you rest for a few days and relax." Yi Fan turned to look at Matsumoto Takeyoshi and calmly said, "Mr. Matsumoto, I am a little tired. I want to go back and rest for a while." He was now thinking about Baihu, Xiao Zhao and Akatsuki, so he wanted to quickly return to the boat and tell them that he was safe. "Good, good, good." Matsumoto Takeyoshi patted Yi Fan's back and said with a smile, "Bufan Kuan, rest first. It won't be too late for me to hold the banquet after you have rested." Yi Fan nodded to Matsumoto Takeyoshi, tapped the ground with his toes, and swept to the boat behind the battleship. "Cut this meteorite into small pieces and send it to Mr. Sato." Matsumoto Takeyoshi turned to the man in white and whispered. The man in white nodded. "Xiao Zhao Hongji, I am back." After landing on the boat, Yi Fan shouted the names of the woman and the fox, opened the hatch, and stepped in. Zing! As soon as Yi Fan opened the door, a white shadow rushed down the stairs and pounced on Yi Fan. Yi Fan smiled and reached out to hug Baihu, who rushed in front of him. "Woo woo!" Baihu passionately licked Yi Fan's cheeks with her pink tongue, and her fox tail swayed excitedly. She hadn't seen Yi Fan for 5 days, so naturally she missed him dearly. Ha ha ha! Yi Fan's cheeks were itchy from Baihu's licking, and he couldn't help but laugh. "Mr. Sato is back." "Greetings, Mr. Sato." Just as Yi Fan was laughing, 2 lights, one green and one white, flashed in front of Yi Fan. After the light flashed, it turned into 2 people. They were none other than Zhang Gong and Wide, who became yin-yang spirits with Yi Fan's help. "Why are you here? Where's Hong Ji?" Yi Fan felt uneasy after seeing the 2 ghosts. When he helped the 2 ghosts become yin-yang spirits, he told the 2 ghosts that without his permission, they couldn't leave the ghost seal, and they had to cultivate well in the ghost seal. Now that the 2 ghosts had appeared in broad daylight, Yi Fan felt that something was wrong. Since returning to the East Sea, Akatsuki hadn't appeared. Under normal circumstances, she should have appeared with Xiao Zhao, and it was impossible that she hadn't appeared yet. Thinking of this, Yi Fan's mind moved, and he mobilized his 5 senses, and began to search for Akatsuki's aura on the 2 boats. He wondered if Akatsuki was joking with him, playing hide-and-seek. However, after a moment, Yi Fan's face suddenly changed. There was no Akatsuki's aura on the 2 boats. Akatsuki wasn't in the East Sea. Yi Fan looked at the 2 ghosts, waiting for their answer. The 2 ghosts looked at each other and hesitated to speak. "Where did Hong Ji go? Speak!" Yi Fan saw that the 2 ghosts were hesitating, and he immediately roared angrily. All signs indicated that something had happened to Akatsuki. Yi Fan's roar frightened the 2 ghosts, and they knelt on the ground. Zhang Gong, who was wearing a white robe and had the ancient seal, Yin, on his forehead, raised his head and said to Yi Fan, "Sir, Miss Yu went out to perform a mission the day after you left, and she hasn't come back yet." "Perform a mission? What mission?" Yi Fan frowned and asked. "Miss Yu didn't tell us what the mission was, but she said that she would come back in 3 days at most." Wide, who was wearing a green robe and had the ancient seal, Yang, on his forehead, replied, "She asked the 2 of us to guard Sister Xiao Zhao here and wait for her to come back." Yi Fan's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. Akatsuki had left the East Sea for 4 days, and it had completely exceeded the 3 days she said. Did she leave alone or with someone else? Yi Fan asked. "Alone," Zhang Gong replied. "Alone?" Yi Fan frowned and asked. "Yes," Wide replied. "Do you know where she went?" Yi Fan asked again. "Yes," Zhang Gong replied. "Yangzhou." "Where's the yin-yang ghost seal?" Yi Fan asked. "Here." Zhang Gong held the seal in his hand and handed it to Yi Fan. "Return to the seal now, and don't come out without my permission." Yi Fan took the seal and said to the 2 ghosts. "Yes," the 2 ghosts replied, and turned into 2 rays of light, and flew into the yin-yang ghost seal in Yi Fan's hand. Chapter 724. After Yi Fan learned that his confidant, Akatsuki, had an accident, he had no time to care about other things. He directly rode the auspicious clouds and rushed to Yangzhou City. He urged the auspicious clouds under his feet to the extreme. A cloud light, like wind and lightning, came to the sky of Yangzhou City in less than 10 minutes. The place under his feet was not strange to Yi Fan. When he was a teenager, his father, Yi Kong, took him here to search for antiques. Yangzhou City was an important place for trade and commerce. Merchants gathered here and were extremely rich. Every year, merchants from all over the country came to Yangzhou City to do business. However, what made Yangzhou City famous was not trade and commerce. In other words, it was not limited to trade and commerce. What made Yangzhou City famous all over the country was this place of prostitution. In layman's terms, it was a brothel. Here, almost every street had several large and small brothels. The facade was luxurious, and beautiful women were like clouds. Fragrant Fragrance Courtyard, Pink House, Spring Breeze Pavilion, Drunken Dream Pavilion, all kinds of erotic names made merchants from all over the country who came here to do business. Even some merchants who only wanted to do business, when passing by these places, began to be unable to move their legs. They were enchanted by a few words of ecstasy and debauchery women who stood at the door of the brothel. They were directly carried in. It was also because this place was famous for its prostitution and commerce, so there were a lot of antiques here. Not to mention other things, just the precious antiques placed in the major brothels were enough to equal half of the Forbidden City's antique. When Yi Fan came here with his father to collect antiques, he was still a young man. What impressed him the most was that the whole Yangzhou City was almost everywhere. There was a delicate fragrance of rouge and powder, which made people feel particularly comfortable. And those women who wore revealing clothes and held fragrant fans in their hands, looking at him flirtatiously and stroking their hair coquettishly, when Yi Fan saw them, his face would always blush to the root of his neck. At that time, he was already 13 or 14 years old, and could be considered half an adult. He was at the age where he was ignorant. In addition, Yi Fan was handsome to begin with. Bufan was also dressed beautifully, so it was natural for him to attract bees and butterflies. Every time this happened, Yi Kong would reach out to cover his eyes and quickly leave. Revisiting this place didn't make Yi Fan feel any sense of familiarity. What he needed to do now was to find Akatsuki. He fixed the auspicious clouds under his feet in the air, then slowly closed his eyes and activated his hearing to search for Akatsuki's voice. For Yangzhou City, where there were no clues, it was best for him to use his hearing to find Akatsuki. He couldn't be more familiar with Akatsuki's figure, footwork, breathing rhythm, and intonation. The reason was simple. She was almost identical to his wife, whether it was her voice or her appearance. However, not long after, Yi Fan immediately opened his eyes, his face completely red. All he heard were obscene, unrestrained, and unbearable sounds. This made Yi Fan, who was young and vigorous, unable to accept it for a long time. He had forgotten that he was in Yangzhou City, a famous brothel. Phew! Yi Fan, whose blood was rushing to his head, took a few deep breaths to calm his restless heart down as soon as possible. After adjusting his mood, Yi Fan closed his eyes again. This time, he learned to be clever. He didn't use his hearing, but urged his mind power to fully perceive the location of Akatsuki's spiritual aura. If he found the location of the spiritual aura, he would naturally find Akatsuki. However, what made Yi Fan shocked was that he almost searched the entire Yangzhou City, but there was no trace of Akatsuki's spiritual aura. Yi Fan suddenly opened his eyes, and his heart was very uneasy. The current situation showed 2 points. First, Akatsuki was not in Yangzhou City. Second, Akatsuki had an accident, and her spiritual aura was exhausted. Yi Fan, who had always been calm, suddenly became anxious. In his opinion, Akatsuki must have had an accident. If Akatsuki was on the way back to Donghai at this time, then he must have been aware of it when he came. He faintly had a hunch that Akatsuki was still in Yangzhou City. Thinking of this, Yi Fan closed his eyes for the third time, and once again used his hearing. Since he couldn't perceive Akatsuki's spiritual aura, then this was the only way to work. Under the open hearing, countless unrestrained, toasting, and obscene sounds immediately poured into Yi Fan's ears. Yi Fan furrowed his brows. He listened attentively while filtering through the noise. He carefully searched for Yu Hongji's familiar voice. After half an incense's time of searching, Yi Fan opened his eyes, and his expression became dignified. After searching for a while, he still couldn't find anything. Could it be that Hongji was really dead? Otherwise, how could he not find any clues about her? When Yi Fan thought of this, his heart was suddenly torn in pain. Above the clouds, his hand clutched his chest, and his eyes were tightly closed, and his heart was like a knife being twisted. In his mind, Akatsuki's voice and smiling face constantly appeared in front of his eyes, making his liver and intestines cut to pieces, making him feel heart-wrenching pain. 2 lines of tears flowed from Yi Fan's eyes. Search, continue to search. If she's alive, I want to see her. If she's dead, I want to see her corpse. Yi Fan said to himself in his heart. If Akatsuki was really not in this world, even if he had to go to the underworld to snatch her soul, he must save Akatsuki. Thinking of this, Yi Fan wiped his tears with his sleeve, and urged the auspicious clouds to descend from the sky at a high speed. Even if he had to turn the whole Yangzhou City upside down, he must find Akatsuki. Swish! When the auspicious clouds were halfway down, Yi Fan, who was above the clouds, dispersed the auspicious clouds under his feet, and at the same time, used his body movement skill and instantly disappeared. Swish! Yi Fan appeared out of thin air in a small alley in the city that was deserted. As soon as he appeared, Baihu, who was lying on his shoulder, immediately began to sniff the air frequently. In the air, there was a faint rouge fragrance. Yi Fan carried Baihu, walked out of the alley, and came to the main street. At this time, it was close to evening, and the sun was setting in the west. In the restaurants on the main street, there was a burst of fragrance of food. Rumble, Baihu's stomach began to growl. During the few days when Yi Fan was at Demon Island, Akatsuki was also not in the East Sea. Baihu could only eat some fruits on the boat. Now that it suddenly smelled the fragrance of food, it naturally felt hungry. Seeing that Xiao Zhao was hungry, Yi Fan immediately turned and walked into a restaurant. This restaurant was luxuriously decorated, and the furnishings were exquisite. The tables and chairs in the hall were all made of expensive wood, and the calligraphy and paintings on the wall were all authentic works of famous masters. Even the waiter was dressed in silk and satin. In such a tasteful restaurant, the people who came to eat here were naturally not ordinary people. A few people who looked like young masters were playing finger-guessing games, drinking and chatting at a square table not far away. From time to time, they would say a few dirty jokes, causing a burst of laughter. The people at the other tables also seemed to have a great background. They were either rich or noble, and there were even people wearing official robes. The scene in front of him made Yi Fan wrinkle his brows. He originally wanted to have some peace in this luxurious restaurant and get some food for Xiao Zhao, so that he could think of a countermeasure to find Akatsuki. He didn't expect that there would be so many people. The sharp-eyed waiter saw that Yi Fan was dressed in a gorgeous black robe and had a jade belt around his waist. He knew that he was not an ordinary person and immediately greeted him. "Sir, what would you like to eat?" the waiter asked Yi Fan. The restaurant was luxurious and exquisite, so the waiter was naturally not comparable to the waiter in the ordinary wine shop. "2 of your restaurant's best dishes, and a pot of wine." Yi Fan looked around the hall and said to the waiter, "Are there any private rooms?" "I'm sorry, but the private rooms are full." The waiter in luxurious clothes said slightly apologetically. Then forget it, quickly bring the wine and dishes, I'm in a hurry. Yi Fan said as he sat down at a square table in the corner. Zing! As soon as Yi Fan sat down, Baihu jumped lightly from Yi Fan's shoulder onto the table. Sir, what would this Baihu like to eat? Looking at the snow-white satin Baihu, the waiter asked Yi Fan. The people who came to this restaurant were either rich or noble, and many of them came with pets, such as cats, dogs, birds, and insects. These people were of noble status, and the waiter couldn't afford to offend them. Naturally, he had to take care of everything. The dishes I ordered are for it, I'll just drink wine. Yi Fan looked up and said to the waiter. He was telling the truth. He was not in the mood to eat at all. He was thinking about the whereabouts of Akatsuki. The 2 dishes he ordered just now were for Baihu. Of course, he ordered the pot of wine for himself. The waiter was dumbfounded after hearing this. The restaurant had been open for so many years, and this was the first time he saw a customer who only ordered for his pet and didn't eat himself. What, is there a problem? Yi Fan frowned and asked the waiter. No, no problem. The waiter came back to his senses and quickly said, Please wait a moment, it will be ready soon. After the waiter finished speaking, he turned and left. Yi Fan picked up the teapot on the table, poured a cup of tea, and pushed it in front of Baihu. Baihu lowered its head and drank the tea. The appearance of the man and the fox attracted the attention of the young men at the table not far from Yi Fan. One of them was wearing a brocade robe, with a jade belt around his waist, and looked like a young man holding a wine cup. As he drank, he looked at Baihu on Yi Fan's table with greedy eyes. Baihu was smart and agile. When it felt that someone was looking at it, it immediately stopped drinking tea, raised its head, and looked across. After meeting the young man's eyes, Baihu, who was drinking half of its tea, turned its head to look at Yi Fan. It's nothing, drink your tea, Yi Fan said to Baihu on the table. Baihu continued to drink its tea with its head lowered. Big brother, is that guy Knight Bufon from the demon-slaying conference? A young man wearing a green robe sitting next to the young man noticed the brocade-robed man's expression and said in a low voice. If he's Yi Bufon, then I'm the King God. The young man in the brocade robe smiled at the man in the cyan robe. He dyed his hair white and had a white fox. Is he Sieyu? You drank too much, right? Big brother, I heard that Eldritch has a strange temper and acts crazily. He can do anything. The less trouble, the better. Let's not provoke that guy. If he is really Eldritch. The green-robed man looked at Yi Fan and didn't continue. Chapter 725. Big brother, this time we came out to play with girls. Don't cause too much trouble, lest we spoil the fun. A young man in a green robe sitting opposite the brocade-robed man advised. That boy has a good appearance and a noble aura. Even if he isn't Eldritch, I'm afraid he isn't a good person. It's best if we don't provoke him. The brocade-robed man looked up at Baihu and didn't say anything. Isn't it just a fox? Tomorrow I'll have my father send someone from the western regions to bring you one. I guarantee you'll like it. Another young man with a fat head and big ears at the table also advised. That's what you said, Baihu of the western regions. The brocade-robed man smiled at that person. Obviously, he listened to the advice. Or rather, he was afraid. Later on, he understood that it was because of his fear that he was able to survive the brink of death. I said, don't worry. That person patted his chest and said, I think you should get a fox spirit for Big Brother, so that he can't get out of bed, heh heh heh. The green-robed man looked at the brocade-robed man and said with a smile. The brocade-robed man smiled and didn't say anything. I heard that the girl tonight is even prettier than that fox spirit. After seeing her, people will be infatuated and even forget their own surname. Heh heh heh. I really want to see. The young man with a fat head and big ears rubbed his hands and said with a lewd smile. I heard that she's still a virgin. I'm really looking forward to it. The green-robed man drank and laughed. I just don't know who will get close to her tonight. The green-robed man said. Of course, it's Big Brother. The young man with a fat head and big ears looked at the brocade-robed man and said with a smile, Big Brother is the son of the prefect of Yangzhou. Who would dare to compete with Big Brother? This time it's not about who's the highest official, but who has the most money. The green-robed man put down his wine cup and said, I heard that someone offered 500,000 taels of silver, but the procuress didn't even look at him. He wants to get that beauty for 500,000 taels of silver. That person is really a country bumpkin. After the fat man heard this, he said with disdain, 3 years of being a county magistrate, and he still wants to King pay 100,000 taels of silver. That brothel keeper has seen all kinds of rich merchants. That little bit of silver isn't even enough to cover her annual expenses. I wonder how much the price of that beauty has been raised, the green-robed man said. Who cares? The fat man laughed. There's still an incense stick's worth of time before the deadline. Big Brother isn't in a hurry, so why are you in a hurry? Don't forget, most of the people drinking in this restaurant are here for that beauty, including that silver-haired boy. The green-robed man looked around at the people in the hall and said, If not for that beauty, who the hell would come to this broken place to eat? Yi Fan took an empty cup from the tea tray on the table and filled it with fragrant tea. He drank while listening to the 4 people's conversation. It was obvious that a beauty had come to a brothel in Yangzhou City. These 4 young masters, as well as the rich and noble diners in the restaurant, were all here for this beauty. No wonder this place was full. It seemed that the brothel wasn't far from here. Yi Fan quietly drank his tea while thinking. Big Brother, how much silver did you bring this time? The green-robed man asked the brothel keeper. If you didn't bring enough silver, then you can't do anything tonight. The corners of the brocade-robed young master's mouth curved as he stretched out 3 fingers. 300,000 taels? The green-robed man asked the brothel keeper. The brothel keeper nodded. Big Brother, you're not joking with me, right? The green-robed man frowned and said. The brothel keeper didn't even look at that man's 500,000 taels of silver, let alone 300,000 taels of silver. I'm talking about gold. The brothel keeper lightly said and drank the wine in the white jade cup. After the 3 people heard this, they were shocked. 300,000 taels of gold was equivalent to 3 million taels of silver. Big Brother is Big Brother. Make a move, Buffon. The fat man slapped the table and laughed. That beauty will belong to Big Brother tonight. I heard that the beauty is a Japanese girl. She's dressed in red and is very beautiful. Her figure is also very good. Compared to her, Yang Yuhuan is just like Zhu Beiji. The green-robed man said with a lustful expression. Big Brother, tonight you must remember to have tender feelings for the fairer sex. Hee hee hee. The group of young masters began to laugh lewdly. Bang! When the words Japanese girl reached Yi Fan's ears, Yi Fan's eyes suddenly widened. The white jade cup in his hand was crushed and tea splashed everywhere. The Japanese beauty that these 4 lecherous worms were talking about was Akatsuki. Yi Fan exclaimed in his heart. This crisp sound caused the 4 people who were laughing lewdly to turn their heads and look at Yi Fan. Under the 4 people's suspicious gazes, Yi Fan stood up and walked straight to them. Where is that brothel? Yi Fan stared coldly at the brothel keeper and asked through gritted teeth. Who the hell do you think you are? How dare you talk to Big Brother like that? The fat man saw that Yi Fan was so rude to the prefectural magistrate's son and immediately stood up to question Yi Fan. Yi Fan's gaze was fixed on the young man in the brocade robe. He stretched out one of his hands towards the fat man. Puff! Before the fat man could say the word speak, a column of blood spurted out from his smelly mouth. Along with the column of blood, more than 20 white teeth also came out. Ouch! The fat man covered his mouth and howled like a pig being slaughtered. He was in so much pain that he rolled on the ground. Yi Fan held the bloody teeth with one hand and placed it in front of the brothel keeper. He slowly let go. Clang! Clang! The red and white teeth fell one by one onto the porcelain plate in front of the brothel keeper, making crisp clanging sounds. This scene silenced all the diners in the hall. Not a single sound could be heard. Not only did this silver-haired kid have a heroic spirit, but his methods were also very powerful. The arrogant brothel keeper's face was as white as a sheet. He looked at Yi Fan with fear and trepidation. He slid down from his chair a few times and forced himself to sit up a few times. Speak! Yi Fan moved his head closer to the brothel keeper's face and said with a ferocious expression, Warm, warm, warm fragrance pavilion. The brothel keeper said with a trembling voice. Where is it? Yi Fan continued to ask. It's on the opposite street. The brothel keeper swallowed his saliva and stuttered. Xiao Zhao, let's go, Yi Fan said as he turned around and walked towards the door. When they passed by the dining table, Baihu jumped from the table and landed firmly on Yi Fan's shoulder. At this moment, a well-dressed waiter came out from the inner room with an exquisite tray of food and wine. Sir, your food and drink. The waiter looked at the fat young master who was rolling on the ground, wailing like a ghost and howling like a wolf. He then looked at Yi Fan who was walking towards the entrance of the restaurant and said. Yi Fan, who was already at the door, didn't reply. He didn't change his posture and didn't stop walking. He waved his left hand lightly behind him. Pa, pa, pa. 3 golden lights flashed by and 3 golden leaves were inserted into the back of the chair above the brothel keeper's head. They were more than an inch deep. The 3 golden leaves were inserted into the back of the brothel keeper's head and directly shaved off the brothel keeper's hair. The brothel keeper, who was so scared that he almost peed in his pants, immediately went bald. His hairstyle was like that of a bald chiton. Xiao Zhao? The man in the green shirt came back to his senses and said in shock, He is evil, eldritch. During the demon-slaying conference, Baihu Xiao Zhao's name was known to everyone. Whoosh! Yi Fan, who had walked to the door, disappeared along with Baihu on his shoulder. Woe! Upon hearing the green-robed man's words and witnessing Yi Fan's strange movement technique, the previously silent diners immediately rushed out of the restaurant and fled in all directions. They had already heard about how ruthless Eldritch was during the demon-slaying conference. Now, even an idiot could guess that Eldritch was here for that Japanese beauty. No matter how bold they were, they wouldn't dare to covet Eldritch's woman. In the blink of an eye, the big restaurant became a mess. Only the waiter with the tray was left standing there in a daze. Evil! Eldritch! The waiter stuttered to himself. In the warm fragrance pavilion, which was only a street away from the restaurant, there was a sea of people, but it was extremely quiet. Inside the magnificent and luxurious hall, over 100 men in luxurious and exquisite clothing sat neatly on a few rows of wooden armchairs, drinking tea quietly with different expressions on their faces. There were old and young men, officials and commoners, and all of them were either rich or noble. Mother Zhang, I'm the one who paid the most money now. Why can't you let me go upstairs? A man sitting in the middle of the first row was scraping the tea in his teacup with the lid, as he asked a plump woman standing not far away. The man was in his 40s and was dressed in casual clothes. His movements exuded an air of nobility. Boss Qian, why are you in such a hurry? The plump woman in luxurious clothes waved a fan. She smiled and said, It's not time yet, is it? We have to follow the rules, don't we? I've already paid 2 million taels of silver. No one will pay a higher price than me. What's there to wait for? You have to know that every minute of the night is worth 1,000 taels of gold. The man in casual clothes glanced at the people sitting around him and said with disdain, If you want to get the beauty, you have to be patient. Before this incense burns out, no one is allowed to go upstairs. The plump woman waved her fan and said slowly. As she spoke, she glanced at the tables beside her. On top of the exquisite Nanmu table, there was a simple gilded incense burner. Inside the incense burner, a stick of sandalwood smoke rose in spirals and drifted up. Send someone to the prefectural yamen and ask if young Master Zhao is still coming. The plump woman moved her head closer to the hunchbacked pimp's ear and said in a low voice, "Tell young Master Zhao that I've already spread the word. If he doesn't come, that beauty will belong to Boss Qian tonight." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.